Chapter 1174. Walking in the ruins full of broken stones, the air emitted a strange, unpleasant smell. Part of it was the disgusting smell of the death fog of the abyss, and the other part was a more strange smell released by something that was distorted by it. It was like the strange smell of urine mixed with the rotten smell of some creatures at the end of some streets and alleys in a big city. It was a little strange, but it was very consistent with the atmosphere of the world that they saw on Unua planet. In the distance there were people sorting out the broken bricks and tiles, cleaning the battlefield, and repairing the city wall. It was not as they thought. The places that should be repaired in the city would still be repaired, but it might not be as meticulous as before. The aura and environment here were not suitable for ordinary life forms to survive. The abyss death fog was overflowing, and there were residual energy waves left behind by the battlefield everywhere. The environment was quite harsh. Life forms that lived here for a long time would either be disturbed by the residual energy waves or be corroded by the abyss death fog. Those things had turned into energy and remained in the air. Their aura was everywhere. Yun Nuashing and Hui did not understand why there were still people who could live so leisurely, completely unaffected by the abyss death fog. Logically speaking, ordinary life forms would be dizzy just by standing here, foaming at the mouth and gradually dying. In fact, they also saw some real ordinary people walking around in the ruins. It's just as you said. This world is abnormal to the extreme, which is why it's so normal that it makes one's hair stand on end. We looked back at other places. The gas of this planet was mixed with faint abyssal death mist. It was abnormal from the beginning to the end. It should be a deeply eroded world. Nothing should be normal, but everywhere was the most normal appearance. Yun Nuashing glanced at him and nodded helplessly. The air here was really terrible. There were remnants of the abyssal death mist, a large amount of unknown energy ripples, and mixed energy particles. Although it was not suffocating, the chaotic energy was enough to cause people to inhale too much of it and not be able to deal with it, causing all kinds of energy side effects. There were also strange energy phenomena that would erupt from time to time due to the accumulation of too much energy. Just now, there was an inexplicable wind, snow, and lightning in the air, which was finally burned clean by a fire. The two of them were stunned when they saw that, but the people around them were used to it and ignored it after a glance. Their nerves were also strong to the point where they could play the zither. TSK, those who can survive in this place are all gods. Hui grinned. He did not have the powerful insight of the Yun Nua planet. He could see a lot of things just by relying on his own eyesight. This world had existed in this normal state for a long time. Generation after generation, it had multiplied for a frightening amount of time. In other words, this world was forcefully extending its life, hanging on to its last breath. It's a little strange. Yun Nuashing frowned. I can't see the past and future of this world. I don't know if it is because of the abyssal death mist. Observer's eye is malfunctioning? No, it can still be used. He pondered for a moment. Just like time has been frozen in this moment forever, there is no future, and the past is gone forever. Hui let out a long sigh and said faintly, "Then what do you see the abyssal death mist like?" "It's chaotic, I can't observe, and everything I see is meaningless. At least this is also a result, unlike here. Everything I see is the same." Yun Nuashing and Hui walked on the broken street and gradually came to a place with fewer people. Although it was called a street, the ground was uneven and there were pieces of debris everywhere like other places. It looked like a place after a disaster. The people who walked here had a heavy heart, and the atmosphere that was inadvertently released was filled with faint sadness, nostalgia, and anger aroused by these emotions. There was no exception. After walking for a while, the two of them came to a place and understood why. What suddenly appeared in front of them was a broken mountain. They could clearly see that it was a building that had merged with the earth. The soil and the building blended together, as if a pavilion had suddenly been buried by thousands of tons of sand. The building that appeared in front of them was such a shape. The exposed corners of the ground had traces of weathering and dilapidation. On this mountain were circles of dark blue light, floating 1 meter above the ground and swaying. There were many similar things on this planet, and every city had one. Yun Nuoshing and the others did not know what it was when they first saw it, but when they saw people standing in front of the light, either bowing, kneeling, whispering, or crying, they could roughly guess what it was: the graveyard of life on this planet, or at least it was similar. These are the lives that died on this planet, the warriors who fought the abyssal death mist spawn and sacrificed their lives. Hui let out a long sigh. The mountain in front of him was about 1,000 feet high. Looking around, he could only see those dark blue balls of light. Each ball of light didn't only represent one life. It could be a member of the Bell clan, a clan, or something else. On the surface there were 10,000 balls of light, but in reality, who knew how many lives they represented? Perhaps even the person who buried them here didn't know. Large clumps of soil were embedded in between the buildings, and together they formed this strange graveyard. Although there were many similar graveyards on the planet, the one they were standing on was the largest one, and also the most dilapidated one. There was no uniform area, and in front of most of the light clusters were strange bouquets of flowers and some things that could not be understood, as if they had just been worshipped. Yun Nuoshing brought Hui to the top of this mountain, and pointed at the golden light cluster. "Look at this." Hui looked up. The golden light cluster was the same size as the other dark blue light clusters, but it was suspended about 2 meters above the ground. Even if he stood on his tiptoes, he could not reach it. Being in this place and looking like this, it was obviously different from the others. A lot of thoughts, countless people's thoughts, are gathered here. Yun Nuoshing lowered his head. The ground of this golden ball of light was empty. It formed a sharp contrast with the ground of the other dark blue balls of light. It was cold and desolate. No one cared about it. The weeds had already grown more than 10 feet tall. "Are you here to pay your respects as well?" The voice behind them made Yun Nuoshing and Hui turn around to look at the person who spoke. It was a tall girl with a head of bright blonde hair, but it was a little dirty. This little girl was wearing a bright yellow short-sleeved shirt and shorts made of rough cloth, and there were patches of brownish yellow stained with mud. She looked a little thin and strong, and her skin was pale white and metallic silver. Her pair of big blue eyes were very bright, and there was an irrepressible spiritual light in them. Her bright blonde hair was messy, and there were some soil and stone fragments hanging on it, as if she had just drilled out of a hole in the ground. Her pretty face could be said to be pretty, and there was always a faint smile on her face. She was also holding a bunch of scattered flowers in her arms. It was not beautiful, but it was very rare. It was really not easy to pick a few flowers in this kind of situation. Yun Nuoshing and Hui were stunned when they heard her words. This little girl was speaking the common language of all races. They originally thought that this world was so distorted that they would not recognize anything in it, but they were shocked by this little girl's words. The two of them looked at each other, and the doubts in their hearts grew heavier. This could be said to be a broken and distorted world, so why did it still retain this language? Hello big sister and big brother. The blonde girl seemed to suddenly remember what she should do. She bowed slightly to Yun Nuoshing and Hui, and politely greeted them. Then she smiled sweetly. "If big sister and big brother are done paying your respects, can I also pay my respects? Every time the chaos ends, I will come to this tomb of solitude to pray for a while. In the past, I was the only one who came here." Hui could not help but spit out a mouthful of water when he heard how she addressed him. He tilted his head to look at Yun Nuoshing, and found that he was so calm as if nothing had happened. This guy was depressed for half a year because a little girl said, "I like men," last time. Now, he was directly treated as a big sister, and he did not have any reaction at all? Yun Nuoshing, of course, did not have any reaction. His whole family almost tacitly agreed that he was born as a man, and he was already used to it. Now that he was called Big Sister, well, he was used to it. He would not express any surprise. Really, he just felt a little stomachache. He nodded and pulled Hui away a little. He nodded to the blonde girl and said, "Well, you can go. Thank you, Big Sister." The blonde girl smiled and nodded. She slowly pushed aside the 10-feet-tall weeds in front of her. First, she took out a few clusters of withered flowers from the weed. Then, she gently placed the bouquet of flowers in her hand in the weed. She clapped her hands a few times and bowed. After the blonde girl finished doing all this, she looked at Yun Nuoshing and Hui and smiled. "Big Sister and Big Brother, do you know who this golden tomb of solitude belongs to?" Yun Nuoshing noticed that there was a faint pride in the little girl's expression, like a child who was anxious to share the only information she knew with her kind. He thought for a moment and shook his head. "I don't know. I just saw it hanging here. I was a little interested today, so I came to take a look." The blonde girl seemed to have known the answer long ago. The smile on her face widened, but there was also a little disappointment. She seemed to be happy that she could share this special situation with others, but also disappointed that no one knew about it. Hui glanced at Yun Nuoshing and could roughly guess what he was planning. He continued, "Don't you know? It seems that no one knows about this thing." Of course, it was nonsense. He didn't know if anyone knew about it or not. Yes, because no one knows, the people who know are especially precious, right? The blonde girl nodded. Her words made Hui and Yun Nuoshing laugh in their hearts at the same time. They hit the nail on the head. "Big Sister and Big Brother, do you know? This sky wasn't like this before." The blonde girl stretched out her small hand and pointed above her head. There was only a black hole in the sky, and there were countless distorted and chaotic starlight. This planet was on the edge of death and life. It was infinitely close to the black hole of the abyss, but it wouldn't really fall in. This was the only celestial phenomenon on this planet, and it would never change. Yun Nuoshing and Hui looked at each other and nodded. The latter said, "I've heard of it, but it's not very clear. I heard that the sky used to be blue." "Blue?" The blonde girl was stunned for a moment and then she laughed out loud. "Big Brother, you must have heard some irresponsible words from someone somewhere. However, similar words are said by many people. Most of them are delusional. Most people don't know what the truth is, and no one cares. A long, long time ago, so long that I don't know how long ago, that was before the land of hope disappeared and before the veil of eternal night covered the sky. The sky used to be a brilliant golden color, just like my hair. There would also be golden air masses floating in the sky." Maybe what I heard was fake." Yun Nuoshing glanced at Hui, who was laughing foolishly. Did this guy really think that every world was blue sky and white clouds? It wasn't like he hadn't seen a dark sky before. Hell was still yellow. However, the two of them didn't ask her how she knew. Her confident tone and faint sense of pride made the two of them feel interesting. Perhaps what this little girl said might be true. The sky of Suya was once golden. The golden ball rose from the extreme west and sprinkled the entire sky with golden light. At night, it would fall from the extreme north, and the golden color of the sky would slowly recede. It would be dominated by the dark night, but it wasn't really dark. Unlike the veil of eternal night, now, the entire sky was dark. It was strange. At that time, there would be bright spots of light known as the night sky lights hanging in the sky. At that time, Suya was still a peaceful scene. That's all a lie. In fact, there would be big and small battles in Suya every day. It's just that they happened in a distant place and weren't in contact with us. But compared to now, the overall situation at that time might be peaceful as a whole. It wasn't as chaotic as today, where people are always worried about whether a disaster will happen in the next second. Yun Nuoshing and Hui sighed. She quickly waved her hand and said, I didn't mean to talk about the present. At that time, Suya was protected by a High One, which was also the main reason for the peace in Suya. The High One stood on the clouds of Suya and looked down on all living things, watching Suya quietly develop. Until one day, the High One created the Land of Hope and invited all the ambitious people of Suya to go there. Because of the High One's name, that place naturally became the most prosperous land of miracles in all of Suya. The warriors who came out of that place protected Suya. It was thought that this peace would last for a very long time, but one day, she raised her hand and pointed to the sky. The veil of eternal night appeared, and the golden sky disappeared forever. The demonic beasts lurking in the eternal night came to Suya and asked everyone in Suya to submit to them. The High One of Suya, of course, did not agree. He and the sacred army of the Land of Hope killed all the demonic beasts that came to invade. This action angered the ruler of the Veil of Eternal Night, and he sent the strongest demonic beasts to encircle the High One and the Land of Hope. He also dropped chaotic energy all over Suya. That energy was like a tide that exploded everywhere in Suya, spreading rapidly through the air and plains. Suya experienced countless natural disasters, and in just a short period of 12 days and nights. At that time there was no longer any distinction between day and night, because the eternal night had already descended. This is just a matter of time, and in 12 days, Suya was almost completely destroyed by the chaotic energy. Suya could not even organize a basic resistance force before it was almost completely wiped out. The Land of Hope also collapsed in an instant, and in the blink of an eye, Suya lost almost all its power. The High One led the remaining 100 sacred army of the Land of Hope to resist with all their might, but in the end, they were no match for the demonic beasts in the Veil of Eternal Night and died in the deepest part of the Land of Hope. The High One's indestructible will swept through the whole of Suya and killed all the demonic beasts. After that, there was no sign of life, and only an indestructible force was left to protect the last piece of land in the Land of Hope. After that, Suya took many years to recover, and originally thought that the demonic beasts would not come again. Until millions of years ago, many more demonic beasts fell from the Veil of Eternal Night onto Suya, but this time, the power of the demonic beasts was not as strong as the last time when Suya was wiped out. However, that chaotic energy never stopped. What happened after that is what happened in Suya's modern era. It has been resisting intermittently, and no one knows when it will end or when it will end. It will probably never end. The little blonde girl sighed. Yun Nuoshing and Hui turned to look at the golden light. The former said, "So, that golden spiritual grave was left behind by the High One in Suya's memory?" The little blonde girl murmured, "Remember? Until now, the actions of the High One at that time are still controversial. Some people have always thought that if Suya had surrendered to the Monarch of Eternal Night, at that time, maybe Suya would not have fallen to such a state, and there are many people who have always thought so. If it was really to remember the High One's words, how could its spiritual grave be so cold and lonely?" Yun Nuoshing let out a low sneer. Hui looked at the little girl and smiled. "What do you think? Do you also think that it would have been better to surrender at that time?" The little blonde girl looked at the big sister who sneered, and her eyes flashed. She shook her head hard. "It's over if we surrender. There will definitely not be a good ending. Perhaps the ending will be even more painful than death." Hui nodded. Perhaps the moment the High One surrendered, all life in the entire Suya continent would directly become demonic beasts, which was the manifestation of the abyss death mist. That would indeed be an ending more painful than death. Yun Nuoshing straightened her face. "This is a very, very distant matter. How do you know?" The little blonde girl suddenly laughed and proudly stuck out her small chest. "Because I am a descendant of the High One." Low laughter came from not far away. Yun Nuoshing and the others looked up and saw a few people who came here to worship letting out low laughter. "That silly girl is still talking about this. She has been talking about it since she was 8 years old. It has already been 6 years. The few people talked and walked further and further away. The little blonde girl was not angry. She just smiled faintly as if she did not hear those words at all. She just looked at the big sister in front of her. Big sister, do you believe it? Yun Nuoshing narrowed her eyes and looked at her. She suddenly smiled and shook her head. I don't know you, so it's hard to say. You just have to believe in yourself. You don't have to care about others. As for me, we have only met for the first time, so I will believe it. Because there is no need for you to lie to me. Even if you lie to me, it won't affect anything. The little girl was a little surprised. This was the first time she had heard such an answer. When the others heard it, they all sneered and advised her not to daydream and wake her up. Otherwise, they might as well criticize that supreme being in front of her. Pfft! The little girl laughed happily. Big sister, you are so funny. She waved her hand at Yun Nuoshing and the others, then turned and walked down the mountain. She jumped with her hands behind her back, as if she was very happy. When the little girl was far away, Hui turned his head and looked at Yun Nuoshing with a smile. Feng, you felt it? Of course I felt it. Yun Nuoshing nodded and cracked her neck. I felt it at first glance. Hui turned around and looked at the golden ball of light and grinned. The High One in Sua back then was actually the heavenly god of origin. The weak bloodline of the heavenly god in that little girl's body is not a lie. It is already very weak, and it is almost impossible for it to awaken. Yun Nuoshing crossed her arms. I have found one of the distortion points of this world, the seal of the laws. I have just deduced that the bloodline of the heavenly god of origin in that little girl is already dead. Was it caused by the war back then? I don't know, maybe. Yun Nuoshing shook her head and suddenly grinned. This world is more interesting than I thought. Chapter 1175. But with the laws of that world, how could a heavenly god of origin be born? Hui looked at the black hole above his head in puzzlement. The laws of the worlds formed by the void are not as strong as imagined, and they are all worlds that exist on the edge of the lower plane. How strong can they be? Yun Nuoshing glanced at him, then raised his head to look at the void without saying a word. Perhaps this was one of the distortions of this world. However, the explanation was very simple. Firstly, this world was originally distorted and mutated, thus giving birth to the heavenly god of origin. Secondly, that heavenly god of origin had gone to places in the upper realm, ascended to the heavenly god of origin in those places, then returned to this world, and then coincidentally encountered the abyssal death mist. Look, it was very simple to explain, but who knew the specifics? This world had gone through almost an eternity and was not destroyed. It still recorded the information of the birth of the void, as well as the energy residue at the birth of the void. Yun Nuoshing did not care about those things, and it was useless to explain too much and investigate too deeply. What was important was that this world once had a heavenly god of origin, and this was an established fact that would not change. Similar experiences of Sua's world could be found in the void. The underworld swept across the 8 elemental worlds and destroyed countless worlds. In the 10 eras that the abyss death mist spread, countless worlds were destroyed. The so-called brave warriors, noble emperors, wise prophets, ordinary soldiers, and even more ordinary people, as well as the great people who were called heroes, all of whom had once left a dazzling light in their worlds, sank into eternal darkness with their worlds. Everything became a past tense and meaningless. Those were all crushed into powder under the ruthless iron hooves of the abyss death mist, silently annihilating in the depths of the void. The heavenly god of origin, the powerful heavenly god that once represented the strongest realm in the 8 elemental worlds, was just like the supreme being of Sua. It sheltered the entire Sua world and built an alliance to fight against the abyss death mist, unyielding until death. What was the end result? Its name, everything about it was drowned in the depths of the void, mercilessly washed away by the sea of time. Its land of hope collapsed, and not many people remembered that such a person once existed in this world. Only a few ancient records and some frighteningly old scholars still had the remaining record. After being repeatedly attacked and spurred by the people of Sua, its actions became abhorrent and laughable, and everything became meaningless. Even someone as powerful as the heavenly god of origin died so silently and in such an aggrieved manner. How pitiful! Yun Nuashing let out a long sigh. You used to be great and powerful, but now you have fallen to such a state. If you were still alive and saw the world like this, and heard the songs of all life in Sua about you, how would you feel? The void has buried everything, and even the heavenly god of origin is no exception. Hui clapped his hands towards the golden ball of light and bowed slightly. Then, he looked towards Yun Nua planet and said, if we allow them to continue developing like this, the next target will be the middle plane, the upper plane, the saint spirit realm and even the god realm. Something is wrong with this world, Yun Nuashing suddenly said. The power of the underworld is like maggots eating away at this world bit by bit, but we can only watch as it continues to grow stronger and move. Our power is also very weak. I know. Hui smiled bitterly and clapped his hands until his cheeks were red. He took a deep breath and looked at Yun Nuashing with determination. But if we don't do anything when it's too late, I will feel regret for not doing anything. The divine realm needs our protection. Yun Nuashing was silent for a few seconds when he heard that. Then, he suddenly smiled strangely. Hey Hui, let me ask you a question. Hui was stunned by his strange expression. What is it? If one day you are betrayed by what you protect, and become the enemy of all life, will you still be so determined? Yun Nuashing smiled sweetly, but his expression was so weak that it was a little distorted. He knew that although he didn't know everything, he knew that the only thing he knew was that the guardians were killed by the people of the divine realm, which strengthened the power of the withering laws. This was unshakable evidence. This was the evidence of the entire divine realm's crimes. The determined expression on Huey's face faded slightly, and a thoughtful look appeared on his face. Perhaps he was imagining that such a situation would happen, or perhaps he was thinking about something else. After a long time, he suddenly took a deep breath and revealed a somewhat indifferent and somewhat understanding smile. Feng, you're worried that we'll end up like Suyao, that supreme being? That we will become notorious in the future because we couldn't protect our own world? Yun Nuashing was stunned for a moment. Then, he suddenly realized that Sua's current situation was a little similar. Well, although he was definitely not referring to this point, he couldn't say it out loud. He couldn't tell Hui that he would die in the future because he was killed by the people of the divine realm, so the current situation was a good excuse. So, he nodded. More or less, I feel the same way. A little bit, but notoriety and whatnot. You know I don't care about that. Yeah. Hui grinned and held the back of his head with his arms. I would be lying if I said that I wasn't worried. No one wants to be notorious in the future, but there are some things that can't be helped, right? He smiled. The future and whatnot, let the future people talk about it. If something irresistible really happens, all I can do is do my best to do what I should do. No matter what the result is, and I don't want to give anyone an answer, at least I have to do it with a clear conscience. Yun Nuashing looked at him quietly. But, Hui, in my reality, only the fall of the Guardians is an inescapable reality. I know this is just a dream, and it's really difficult to reverse anything, but I really don't want to wait for that day to come. Even if it was already an established reality, he didn't want to be a witness. He vaguely felt something. Maybe it was because of the things that happened in this world that made him think about a lot of unnecessary things, or maybe it was because of other reasons. In short, he just thought of this matter, and he couldn't stop it from staying in his mind. He had a feeling that he returned to this time and space so that he could witness that thing happen. He couldn't say it out loud. He could only let the topic go on like this. A clear conscience? What is considered a clear conscience? Protect the divine realm until you die in battle? Feng, you're too pessimistic. Hui smiled bitterly. Of course, he knew why Yun Nua's star was so pessimistic from the beginning. That legendary realm was like a mountain pressing down on his head. The strongest person in the divine realm was right in front of him, and that was Feng Ling. Even the first macro world in the 8 elements realm was like this. As for the other worlds, he really did not believe that there would be any miracles. Instead of praying for a miracle to happen and the appearance of a heavenly god of primordial, it was better to think that they would be promoted to heavenly gods of primordial before that day came. No matter what, 2 heavenly gods of primordial could forcefully push back this disaster, right? Yun Nuoxing looked at him, still thinking about other things in his mind. He suddenly sighed. If only he could be stronger and control everything. This was definitely not Feng Ling's idea. Such an extreme idea was definitely not something that lazy guy would think of. He didn't know what Feng Ling was thinking in the original spacetime. Now that the thoughts of the 3 of them were running, he didn't know what he would think of. What was happening now had definitely deviated from the original track of history. However, these were just small ripples. In the river of history, they were just small currents that didn't affect the big picture. There would be a stronger force that would correct all of these. None of the major events that should happen would be absent. There will always be a way. Hui patted Yun Nuoxing's shoulder and smiled. Gods bless the divine realm. When the car reaches the mountain, there will be a way. Even if there isn't a way, the 2 of us can still carve out a path with our hands. Yun Nuoxing grinned and turned to walk down the small mountain. Let's go and take a look at other places. We need to understand the uniqueness of this abnormal world. If we know, there may be a way to salvage everything. That's right, everything. Even if it was just a self-deceiving dream, he still wanted to change it. In the memory of this world, he and Hui had known each other for a long time, far longer than the fetters of life. He wanted to change that future. If possible, at least he didn't want it to happen here. Hui smiled and followed Yun Nuoxing. His arms were still holding the back of his head. He said lazily, "If that's the case, I have a good place to go." "Well, I just saw it. I bet you saw it too, and you want to go there now." Yun Nuoxing looked at him with a smile. "How about telling me the direction of the destination together?" Hui nodded. After waiting for 3 seconds, the 2 of them took a deep breath and said in unison, "The east. The forest that is so dark that it is emitting smoke." Hui added. Yun Nuoxing smiled. "Then let's go. This world is much smaller than the realm of the god. It's quite easy to explore. We can't afford to waste too much time." In a shabby hut in the corner of the ruined city, a girl with long blonde hair knelt on the ground with her hands clasped together in a praying posture. In front of her was a cluster of dim golden light. After a long time, she slowly opened her eyes and looked to the east. She murmured, "The light of order will come. This eternal nightmare will finally come to an end." The girl finished praying and stood up. She lay on the bed with her arms and legs spread out. She sighed bitterly. "But ancestor, when will the light of order come? We just wait and wait. Is there really no other way? We can't even save our own world." There was only the empty echo of energy in the small room. Other than that, there was nothing else. The blonde girl stared blankly at the ceiling. She thought of the 2 people she saw not long ago. Her expression was a little strange. What a strange big sister. In the east of the ruined city, there was a grotesque jungle. It was not supposed to be so weird. Before the power of the abyssal death mist eroded this vibrant jungle, this vast dark forest in a huge crater was the richest place in Sua. It was the home of countless lives. This forest followed a rugged path around the crater and inadvertently drew strange patterns. It was like a magical pattern drawn by a whimsical artist. Except for the artist himself, no one could understand it. However, The energy of the abyssal death shroud had distorted the mountains and forests here, turning the once vibrant forest into a twisted and grotesque place filled with nightmares. It had become a place where the abyssal death shroud spread, but strangely, there were no spawns of the abyssal death shroud emerging from here, nor were there any creatures that would cause one's scalp to go numb and foam at the mouth to lose their sanity. However, when the forest was completely infected, all life within 1,000 miles was extinguished as if by agreement, and there was not a single trace of life left on the land. The extreme point of distortion in the SUA world. Well, a point of distortion in all normal things. It's hard to imagine that the abyssal black hole is so close, but this world only has such a corroded place. We looked down at the indescribably dark mountain forest from high above and grinned. This should have been a fairly normal phenomenon in Swari. It was so close to the black hole of the abyss, so it was normal for any kind of distortion to occur. However, it was said that those demonic beasts, that is, the abyss death mist derivatives, fell directly from the black hole of the abyss. In the whole of Swari, the only place they could observe was this frighteningly dark one. The jungle must have been very beautiful before it became like this. Yun Nuoshing and Hui both firmly believed that at least it would not be the scene they saw now, the scene where life was cut off. Yun Nuoshing and Hui landed on the top of the mountain. They looked at the dark ancient trees, which were thousands of feet tall. The trees, which were taller than the mountain, swayed in the wind as if they were about to fall from the sky. I don't think there's anything to see here. Hui held Yun Nuoshing's shoulder, his whole body in the air as he looked into the distance. He lowered his head and looked at him. The jungle is corroded by the abyssal death mist. How is it? Did you see anything? Nothing. Or rather, I didn't expect to see anything. Yun Nuoshing shook his head. I'm just a little curious, so I came to take a look. The cornerstone, which is so deeply corroded but does not give birth to the abyssal death mist spawn. Then again, do you think this cornerstone really did not give birth to the abyssal death mist spawn? What do you mean? Hui and Yun Nuoshing's eyes met and he frowned. Once upon a time, I once knew a place that also had a powerful cornerstone, and the degree of corrosion was even more serious than here. Of course, it gave birth to a large number of abyssal death mist spawn. Well, although the two situations are not the same, both are mutations. Let's ignore that for now. What I want to say is that half of the abyssal death mist spawn there were transferred. Transferred? Hui was stunned for a moment. Yun Nuoshing nodded. The abyssal death mist spawn. Even the low-level ones, those without sentience, have the ability to transfer. As he spoke, he pointed at the forest before them. Maybe this is an effective cornerstone, but the things that were born have all run away. Huh! Hui jumped down from Yun Nuoshing's shoulder and waved his hand. Where could they have gone? I don't know. It's just my guess. Yun Nuoshing shrugged. Let's go in. Hui scratched his head and followed him as he watched him walk into the forest. He always trusted what Feng said, just like he trusted the truth of this world. That's right, Feng's words were basically the truth. The two of them walked through the twisting mountain forest, following the rugged mountain rocks down into the depths of the forest. There was no such thing as a path in front of them, and the air was extremely uncomfortable. There was also a large amount of abyss death mist remaining. If it weren't for the fact that the two of them weren't ordinary people, they would have long been affected by the oppressive atmosphere here. Hui looked around. All he saw were weird and twisted plants, and they were squirming and moving all the time. Even the ground under their feet would suddenly collapse or bulge as they walked. There was instability everywhere. The twisted rules, time, and space had created this nightmarish scene. He and Yun Nuoshing even saw two trees using the roots below as their feet, and walked out along the ridge with a foot. Saplings would grow wildly in the pits, and they could grow half a foot tall in just a minute. A huge rock protruding from the mountain wall suddenly turned into black lava, and after flowing for a distance, it turned into black ice. "I think I will have nightmares sooner or later," Hui said casually. Yun Nuoxing was stunned for a moment and looked at him. "You have nightmares? When you have nightmares, I'm afraid the sky will fall." Hui laughed and waved his hand. "You have moments when you are awake. Why can't I have nightmares?" Yun Nuoxing stuck out her tongue. When Hui said that, he just remembered that he did not know when he became much more awake. Of course, the feeling of laziness had been in his spiritual power, but it seemed to be temporarily suppressed. This was the victory of Quarter Moon and Yun Nuoxing. In the dark and twisted forest, there seemed to be nothing but these nightmarish scenes. Yun Nuoxing and Hui both felt so. After walking for a long distance, when they almost could not stand the scene here, they inexplicably felt the fluctuation of order. That feeling was like finding a piece of ice in the depths of the sun. A faint light, very faint, passed into the eyes of the two through the layers of twisted trees. The faint divine light, the faint light of order, and the fluctuation of divine right were not any of the fluctuations of divine right that they recognized. In the depths of the twisted forest, it was like a spark in the dark night, dim but extremely eye-catching. There is actually the existence of the light of order in this place that is twisted into the sea of rules? Hui said with a little surprise after sensing for a moment. Yun Nuoxing squinted slightly and looked at the light of the stars for a while. She said, "It's a weapon." "Weapon?" Hui turned back to look at her and used his thumb to point into the depths of the Ring Mountain forest. "It can't be the weapon of Sua, the Empyrean god of origin, right? It can emit such a degree of light of order. Logically speaking, only something of that level of person can do that." "Ha, that Supreme One hasn't given up on this world yet." Yun Nuoxing let out an ambiguous laugh. "Shall we go and have a look?" "There is nowhere to go. Let's go and have a look." Chapter 1176. The huge black tree roots that protruded out of the ground and some forests that were printed with blood-red light interweaved to form a winding path. Yun Nuoxing and Hui jumped around in the huge tree roots, and they couldn't even walk properly. In just a few minutes they almost became two bouncing rabbits. The black trees and shrubs hid the remains of some collapsed buildings. They were not ordinary buildings. They looked a bit like towers or something else. Dim charms were engraved all over the building debris. They had lost all their energy and were as dim as imprint. They might have had some special effect in the past, or used to resist something, or used to guard something. At this moment, they had lost all their brilliance. Yun Nuoxing followed behind Hui lazily, jumping between the tree roots and the forest. The only colors that could be recognized were the crazy blood red and black. The tree roots, which were several feet long, danced wildly in the air like vines. It reminded Yun Nuoxing of the tree she saw in the ghost forest. They didn't rush directly towards the golden light spot. It was covered by something and they couldn't get close to it directly. They had to follow a special method to walk around the mountain forest to get in. It was like walking through a maze. Of course, there were other ways. They just had to blast through this place. However, if they destroyed the maze here, the light of order in the middle would also be destroyed. After walking for some time, Yun Nuoxing suddenly stopped. She looked at Hui's back in front of her and said, "Hui, we've been here for half an hour and disappeared. You just volunteered that the things in this tiny place couldn't stop you. I trusted you quite a bit." Yun Nuoxing pointed at the big tree under her feet and said, "This is the 12th time we've passed by here." The back in front of them trembled. Hui turned his head stiffly and gave Yun Nuoxing an extremely bright, silly smile. He swung his long black hair and jumped over from the spot that was more than 10 meters away. He landed in front of Yun Nuoxing with a thud and pressed his hands on her shoulders. He looked at her affectionately and said, "Phone, I just want to give you a chance to show off. I can't bear to." Yun Nuoxing pointed to the side and said, "Get lost." Oh, looking at Hui, who was squatting weakly at the side, Yun Nuoxing shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He had long known that this guy was as reliable as always, so reliable that he would lead others into the pit. Previously, it was fine if he didn't walk around randomly. Before entering the maze, he found the way. Now, after walking around for half a day, he was lost. The characteristics of this maze were easy to understand. It was a relatively special array, something similar to a magic array. However, he did not know what the magic array in the other world was called, so he just called it that. The complexity of this maze depended on the time they spent in it. In other words, the longer they were in the dark forest, the harder it would be to get out. That was why he said that he had found the way at the beginning, but now he was almost completely lost. However, the destination was still there. How to get there was still a problem. Hui stuck out his tongue and smiled foolishly. Of course, he also saw the characteristics of this maze, but he was really not good at finding the way. Why did he volunteer to open the way? God knows what he was thinking at that time. He just walked forward without thinking. Well, he messed up and still needed Feng to clean up the mess. But this was not the first time this had happened. Yun Nuoxing stood on tiptoe and kicked a tree root twice. He pursed his lips and looked at the forest. His eyes emitted a faint colorful light, and his vision changed in front of him. He really did not expect to use the observer's eye in this corner of the void. Go this way. Yun Nuoxing pointed to a place. Hui quickly jumped up and followed behind him with a silly smile. He followed his lead deep into the dark forest, and at the same time was vigilant of the surrounding situation. When he was focused on breaking the array, he did not have much energy to notice other things. At this time, he needed to be vigilant of the surroundings. Yes, they had a tacit understanding from years of interaction. It was always necessary to be vigilant in an unfamiliar place. However, Yun Nuoxing did not think that anything could be born on Sua that could threaten them. Even the Abyss Death Mist spawn could not. He was very relaxed and focused on breaking the array. The two of them passed through the wreckage of some collapsed buildings, and the surrounding scenery finally became unfamiliar. This time they really went deep into the dark forest, and they could see more building fragments. The fragments at the corners barely pieced together a strange building that looked like a pyramid, a tower, a rhombus, and so on, and it should be engraved with quite a lot of runes and charms. Yun Nuoxing felt that if the observer's eye was not wrong, this should be some kind of defensive building. Defensive? Did a battle happen in this forest? Hui listened to him and showed a thoughtful look. He looked around. But there are no signs of battle here. Well, even if there was, it should have been destroyed. It has been so long. Yun Nuoxing nodded in agreement. He stood still and closed his eyes. His soul and consciousness gradually spread out in all directions. The entire dark forest, the building debris, and the surrounding distorted scenery merged into his mind. He gradually seemed to be able to recall what had happened here years ago. In this twisted forest, there were soldiers in silver-green armor. They surrounded the strange tower-like building. The energy of the towers in the forest was connected to each other to form a thick defensive barrier. Inside the barrier, there were various soldiers who could use long-range energy attacks, forming a defensive line against invisible enemies. Perhaps there was no way to manifest, but from the current situation of this place, it could be inferred that it was most likely against the Abyss Death Mist spawn. The strange tower-like building that was surrounded by soldiers shone as bright as the sun. The energy released by the runes all over the tower turned into a solid ring that surged out in all directions. The divine power and the majestic breath of life could be felt even after countless years. The rumbling energy exploded around the defensive barrier. Perhaps there were enemies coming in from all directions. The rumbling energy from within the barrier rushed out in all directions. But still, it could not stop the swarm of enemies. The energy of the demonic beasts landed on the barrier and only caused a burst of energy sparks. Yun Nuoxing could not see the damage of the Abyss Death Mist spawn. It was probably a stalemate. The soldiers were trapped inside the barrier and could not get out. The demonic beasts could not attack this place. Well, that was probably the case. But the situation collapsed in the next second. The battle did not last long. The collapse came very suddenly. The abyss death mist erupted from within the defensive barrier and directly swallowed all the soldiers. The soldiers who had lost their minds destroyed the tower-like building themselves. The defensive barrier disappeared. The invisible enemies knocked down the forest and the tower-like building, crushing everything in their way. The dregs of the abyss death mist fell to the ground and corroded the ground, dyeing it a deathly black. The whole process ended like a game. The defensive position collapsed from the inside. It was so fast that even he could not see clearly what had happened. Everything was over. Yun Nuoshing was just about to come back to his senses when he felt his arm being touched. Thinking that it was Hui looking for him, he quickly came back to his senses. Just as he looked to the right, his face turned pale. It was a black eight-legged creature. It was a resident of the forest and was very common. It liked to make webs and was high in protein. Perhaps it was poisonous. Looking at the patterns and the color of the runes infected by the abyss death mist, it did not look like an ordinary creature. It probably fell from a tree. There was a black thread on its butt. More importantly, it was as big as a wash basin. It was almost 1 or 2 meters long when stretched out. Even the fine hairs on its legs could be seen clearly. It was still moving. It was still moving and falling. And from the looks of it, it was probably this thing that touched his arm just now. Ah! It was rotten. He was going to die. Yun Nuoshing's face was cold and calm. His cold gaze made the wash-basin-sized creature feel that he was not someone to be trifled with. Its black eyes rolled around and reflected his extremely cold gaze. After thinking for a while, it kept the thread and climbed up. Yun Nuoshing even heard the sound of creaking legs. Seeing that the creature only calmly retracted his gaze after climbing up the tree, the corners of his eyes twitched fiercely. Ah, you've come back to your senses? What did you see? Hui walked over from the side and said. However, when he saw Yun Nuoshing's expression, he was stunned. Feng? Why is your face so pale? Yun Nuoshing turned his head stiffly and looked at him stiffly. He stretched out his fingers stiffly and pointed at the wash-basin-sized creature that was standing on the tree branch and was about to build a nest. He said stiffly, how are you guarding it? Do you know that there won't be any bones left within a meter of me? Hui looked at the wash-basin-sized creature and saw that he looked like he was about to faint. He rubbed his arms with goosebumps all over his body and finally understood what had happened. He couldn't help but hold his stomach and laugh. He slapped him hard. Aha! Feng, you're actually afraid of this little thing? Ha! As the observer of the realm of the gods, looking at the entire void. Oh, except for the underworld, you're practically standing at the top of the void. You're actually afraid of this little thing. I thought you had already overcome it? Yun Nuoshing sat down on the ground after being slapped. His whole body was trembling. My legs are weak. I can't walk anymore. That thing is as big as a wash basin. Hui laughed even harder. The Spider King of a certain demon clan in the realm of the gods is as big as 1,000,000 miles. If you really want to talk about its size, you can find an even bigger one. Yun Nuoshing almost fainted when she thought of that thing. After a long while, Yun Nuoshing lay on Hui's back. Her whole body was still trembling. She was still guiding him on the right path. She couldn't help but mutter, as big as a wash basin. I touched it. I touched it. I was only 1 step away from fainting. Hui, who had a big bump on his head, grimaced in pain. He even used all his strength to carry Yun Nuoshing on his back. Ouch! You're about to faint from fright, but you still have the strength to hit me. It hurts so much. Who told you to laugh? Yun Nuoshing rolled her eyes. Hui laughed bitterly and turned back to look at the guy who was as big as a wash basin. Fortunately, Yun Nuoshing had tensed up and was not scared to the point of losing his mind. Otherwise, that unlucky guy would have ascended to heaven together with this forest, and not even dregs would be left. As the two of them got closer to the golden light, the distortion in the dark forest became even more exaggerated. Yun Nuoshing's eyes were still replaying what had happened here. She saw the tide of darkness tearing this place apart from the inside out. She saw the soldiers in silver-green armor falling one after another. Those who fell and those who were still standing let out frenzied and meaningless roars. She didn't know what they were calling for, but they charged forward without fear of death. Even if some people here would become part of the enemy in the next second, they were still fearless. Something. I feel like the retroactive image directly assimilated this space. We could also see it clearly. When he heard those people's shouts, he couldn't help but frown. It sounds a little like the first generation's divine language. The first generation's divine language. Yun Nuoshing suddenly stopped trembling. She turned her head and looked at him. It sounds a little familiar. Did you tell me about it before? Hui nodded. We once tidied up the bottom of the sea of precepts in the realm of the gods. Do you still remember? Yun Nuoshing thought carefully and nodded. A little. The realm of the gods recorded mysterious information about the birth of the Deyuan realm. Almost all of it was accumulated at the bottom of the sea of precepts. At that time, I felt an inexplicable vibration, so I followed you to the bottom of the sea of precepts in the realm of the gods to take a look. In the end, we didn't find anything, right? Hui was stunned for a moment. He laughed dryly. It's not that we didn't find anything. I just had some extra gains. Oh, I remember now. At that time, you told me something about the first generation's divine language. Yun Nuoshing suddenly came to a realization. She finally remembered. Hui nodded. That's it. It's just a little fragment. There are a lot of things hidden at the bottom of the sea of precepts. It's all incomprehensible information that can no longer be understood. So, I only know a little bit. It sounds a little like those roars you heard just now. Yun Nuoshing looked at the soldiers who fell like they were cutting chives. She couldn't help but frown. 3 or 4 similar. If only one syllable is similar, then it's nothing. But every sentence is like some kind of prayer from the previous era or words spoken during a battle. Huey's cheeks twitched. Well, I can't remember. Anyway, that's what it is. But the syllables have changed a lot. It's a little closer to the current universal language. The two fell silent at the same time. They walked quietly on the road. Everything around them didn't stop. The soldiers in silver-green armor kept falling. Gradually, a black aura came out from the ground. The ground was corroded by the abyss death mist. What a strange place. Yun Nuoshing sighed. Since the last destruction of the primordial realm, this world has become a little strange. Well, it's all the information we got from the bottom of the sea of precept. 2 pieces of information, pointing to 2 completely different worlds. It's very strange. After the destruction of the primordial realm, many loopholes appeared in the world. It became a little strange. The primeval god can no longer appear. It's an extreme manifestation of this influence. We also agreed. Both of them deliberately changed the topic. In fact, they were thinking about the problem of this world. The world that was born at the beginning of the void was also related to the divine language. The destruction of the primordial realm, that time wiped out 99% of the worlds in the grand primordial realm. Many things were not left behind. The realm of the gods, the Saint Spirit realm, and the Changyuan realm were almost blown into powder. Now they even suspected that this world was left behind from the previous era. Then, it just so happened that 0.1% of the survivors was here. Nonsense, right? Well, in fact, they were more or less convinced. Because it really didn't make sense. There were so many coincidences. Well, if the previous coincidences could be attributed to the underworld, then this time, when it involved the language that was similar to the first generation's divine language and the common language of all races, it was impossible for them not to think too much. Yun Nuashing patted Huey's head and jumped down from his back. Looking at the bright golden light that passed through a thick wall of trees in front of them, she could not help but squint. Across a dozen or even an unknown number of eras, the divine energy had washed away the backtracking images. The real scene appeared in front of them. They could already feel the high divinity energy. Feng Hui stood beside him and looked at the golden light cover in front of them. The timeline has been cut off. The rules and causality have been cut off. This is a completely independent tomb. I'm afraid there's a big guy buried in it. Yun Nuashing nodded. He also felt it. It was an independent tombstone, independent of this world. There was nothing here except for that thing. Nothing would exist. This was the burial method used by high-ranking gods like them. It was simple and quick, and they did not need the help of others. That's right, this was used by high-ranking gods to bury themselves. A funeral without a coffin was forever independent of everything and existed forever with the world. I found the second distortion point. But it's a man-made distortion point. The energy that permeates from here is very weak. It's so weak that you can't find the energy trail after you leave this dark forest. But it's definitely there. This energy affects this world. Not just Sua but also this world of light. Hui grinned. Are we going in? Breaking that eternal stagnation won't alarm anything, right? This world can't afford any more torment now. It won't. Yun Nuashing snapped his fingers and grinned. Probably, it was an eternal place, detached from all restraints. There were no rules, no causality, and no time. Space was just an imaginary thing that existed. The images around them that had not been eliminated were about to end. But unfortunately, when they saw this place, it was already a brilliant golden light. They could not see what was inside. After the tide of darkness, which had already become blurry, hit the layer of golden light, the two collided and the energy cancelled each other out. In the end, the tide of darkness disappeared. The bright sun-like barrier also faded and gradually became transparent. No, there's something inside. Yun Nuashing looked at the image. His vision was divided into two halves. The left half was the present, and the right half was the projected image. It cut the golden barrier into two halves. At this moment, the color of the right half of the golden barrier gradually became similar to the left half. It was about to become the same. In the transparent golden light, he saw something similar to talismans and magic circles. The two of them did not recognize it. Well, that was nonsense. That was the special product of this world. They had not even tried to understand it, so how could they recognize it? The tide of darkness and the army of darkness seemed to have gone crazy. They desperately crashed into the golden barrier. The soldiers were all gone. They were either crushed by the abyssal death mist or assimilated into a part of the derivative and disappeared after crashing into the barrier. The energy of the abyssal death mist was rapidly weakening the energy of the golden barrier. However, before the tide of darkness crashed into the golden barrier, an incomparably powerful energy suddenly burst out from the divine domain. It was full of strong obsession and was so strong that it was almost crazy. The breath of life was like an exploding storm that swept across the entire Suja continent in an instant. The golden and green energy turned into a sacred storm and turned into a beam of light that rushed into the sky. In the sacred land in the center of the storm, there were sacred runes and talismans that were almost burning. The runes that were driven by self-destruction were torn apart when the sacred storm exploded. The energy turned into a shock wave that swept across the Suja continent, crushing all the tide of darkness that was entrenched on the Suja continent into particles. The battle that filled the entire Suja continent ended in an instant. All the remaining energy of the abyssal death mist was gathered here and suppressed here. The inextinguishable will of the Most High swept across Suja and killed all the demonic beasts. Thinking of what the little girl said, Hui could not help but gulp. He looked at the mountain and said, "Damn, this place is the destroyed land of hope? That is to say, the Most High is buried here? It's suppressed here. No wonder there are no derivatives." Yun Nuoshing frowned. Obviously, he thought of the same thing, but he did not agree. If that's the case, then the Most High was planning to die together with the demonic beasts from the beginning? Can't a heavenly god of origin really deal with these shiny cannon fodder? We thought about it carefully and felt that it was true. What appeared here was only the tide of darkness and the army of darkness, not the real people of the underworld. These abyssal death mist derivatives were just the minions of the minions that they made. Even if they had the power of a heavenly god, they were only heavenly gods. How could the heavenly god of origin not be able to deal with them? What do you mean? Yun Nuoshing looked up and pointed to the sky. There should be 2 battlefields, but the things that were left here should be related to the Most High. Well, there should be no problem with that. But the source of the battle that ended the entire Suja continent is definitely here, we said. Yun Nuoshing nodded and turned his head to look at the barrier. All the images had ended and everything had disappeared, leaving only the ruins left behind by the storm. Yun Nuoshing waved his hand. Let's not worry about that first. The place where the Most High fell is in the land of hope, in another place in this world. Now, we followed his gaze and looked at the golden barrier. He nodded. Let's take a look at that thing first. Chapter 1177. The source of all the high divinity energy was the only high divinity energy left in the Suya continent. Even the heavenly god-tier life form on Suya did not have such divinity. That high-level life form was indeed a heavenly god-tier life form. Even if it was weaker than the heavenly gods in the upper planes, such as the realm of the gods, it was still a heavenly god-tier life form. However, it did not have the divinity and rules that were comparable to its own realm. There was no way to understand it now. Yun Nuoshing could not tell if it was just a facade. But anyway, it was a heavenly god with flaws, and the flaws were fatal. A heavenly god without the divinity and rules that corresponded to its realm was almost like losing its core, and its corresponding characteristics would be reduced. To put it bluntly, it was a god wearing the skin of a heavenly god. This was the third distortion point that the two of them had found, but there was still a question mark behind this distortion point. There were many things that were not confirmed yet. They had found it when they arrived not long ago. As for it, it was unlikely that it had found them. Otherwise, it would have come out at this moment to do something. Yun Nuoshing and Hui looked at each other and nodded. The energy in their bodies fluctuated weakly. The massive divine energy formed a layer of relatively stable rules around them. They thought for a moment and did not intend to break the eternal stagnation in the golden shield. They held on to the layer of stable rules and hoped that they would not break the stagnation. But there was nothing they could do if they accidentally broke it. Nothing special would happen anyway. On the other hand, a small part of the distortion of the rules of this world was related to the golden shield. The overly powerful divine energy was like a fish bone stuck in the throat of the rules, making it impossible to repair. But on the other hand, it also suppressed the abyssal death mist of this world. But it only suppressed the abyssal death mist that had been left on Suya. It could not do anything to the new ones. After passing through the golden barrier, he felt as if he was entering water. His vision didn't experience any dizziness, but it suddenly turned from blurry to clear. The degree of change was similar to when he woke up in the morning and rubbed his eyes. The scene inside the golden barrier immediately became clear. After a few shakes, a blurry thing slowly appeared. It was a scepter, the scepter of divine authority. It exuded the aura of a higher god, or more accurately, the divine energy of the Empyrean god of origin. It seemed to still be floating about a foot above the ground. Upon closer inspection, One could see that the handle of the scepter was full of crack. It was already broken, and even its core had been destroyed. The divine energy had completely leaked into this space, but it was sealed by the golden light shield, and did not leak out at all. As soon as Yun Nuashing and Hui entered, they were hit in the face by an extremely rich divine energy. This energy was not full of destruction. They did not know if all the destructive energy had been released in the past. What was left here was pure divine energy that had been accumulated for countless years. The two calmed down and looked around. This was a pure golden space. The space was like a bowl of golden liquid that was constantly rippling with golden ripples. There was no land, no sky. As they expected, this was a completely isolated space. Moreover, they did not cause any movement in this space when they entered. The core that maintained this space had collapsed and was floating alone in this space like a time ghost. This is probably the scepter of the heavenly god of origin. Hui crossed his arms and looked at the broken scepter. He pondered for a moment. Unless this Sua is really so evil that he can give birth to two heavenly gods of origin. Yun Nuashing looked at the broken barrier and shook her head slightly. It might not be possible to give birth, but it should be possible to maintain two heavenly gods of origin. However, this information was not very useful, so it was not a problem to keep it a secret. The two walked forward for a distance and approached the broken scepter. Hui suddenly took a step forward and stood in front of Yun Nuashing. "It's about time to come out, right? A ghost that has crossed countless times. Do you really think that we can't find you?" There was a slight movement in the golden soup-like space. There was an invisible energy surging in this space. A wave of divine energy swept across, causing Yun Nuashing and Hui to tremble. Yun Nuashing glared at Hui and blinked hard. She meant, "I didn't even notice the existence of a ghost here. How did you find it?" Hui's eyes were also blinking. "I guessed it." Yun Nuashing. She turned her head speechlessly and looked at the place where the space rippled. The golden soup-like space in front of them was squirming rapidly, and a figure slowly appeared. It was a figure with a sage-like demeanor. He was wearing a silver-green robe, and his hair and beard were white. Although his face was a little old, he was very spirited. Speaking of which, does a ghost have a spirited spirit? That figure appeared and slowly opened his eyes. He gently lifted his eyes to look at the two uninvited guests who had barged into this eternally stagnant space. Suddenly, he slowly exhaled and said, "So, the latecomers have finally arrived. The common language of all races. It was very normal. At the end of the previous era and in this era, almost all places used this language. We wanted to change the name of the language to the common language of all realms. If he went to other worlds, he would be able to hear this language. It was as if the four seas were his hometown. It was used in almost the entire 8 elements realm. So, who are you?" Hui looked at the ghost and raised his hand to point at the scepter. "Is it the scepter's consciousness or the scepter's master?" "Neither." These words were said by Yun Nuashing, causing Hui to be stunned. The old man with white hair and beard also looked at the former, only to hear him slowly say, "It is a mixture of the weapon wielder and the scepter's consciousness." Hui thought for a moment and understood what it meant. When the tide of darkness came, the weapon wielder forcibly used the scepter's energy to repel all the demonic beasts on the Suja continent. Hui was also swallowed by the divine power because he overstepped his authority to use the weapon of the heavenly god of origin. The scepter was on the verge of collapse due to the exhaustion of energy, and the weapon wielder's consciousness was assimilated by it. Well, that must be it. He can also think properly. The old man's eyes were still a little hazy and a little confused. He looked at Yun Nuashing and Yun Nuashing. His long white eyebrows gradually relaxed as if he had finished sensing. He then bowed. "Greetings, noble god. Are you still awake?" Hui said and waved his hand. "Forget it. The two consciousnesses have fused and slept for so long. It is impossible to stay awake. Well, we are from the outside. This is nonsense. Do you still remember what happened to this world? Tell us what you remember. The world is in a mess now, and we don't know where to go. The old man shook his head and thought hard for a while. As Hui wished, he shook his head. I don't remember anything. Hui sighed. Then you should still remember the reason why you stayed here, right? Why are you still asking? Yun Nuoxing raised one of her folded hands. This place was left after the explosion. The remaining energy was used to suppress and guard this world. Hui slapped his face. He felt that his IQ had dropped a little. He did not know if it was because he had just been punched by Hui. The white-haired old man could probably be called the scepter's consciousness. He shook his head in a daze. That seems to be the case. But there should be something else. Master, the Most High told us. Well, that's your business. God knows what's going on in your internal affairs. Yun Nuoxing shrugged. She turned around and pulled Hui out. Let's go. We won't be able to find anything here for a while. Wait a minute. The scepter's consciousness suddenly stretched out his hand. However, his face was still in a daze. Yun Nuoxing waved her hand. We won't leave this world for the time being. We still have to look for some special places in this world. We won't stay here. You have been awakened by us. Be honest and tidy up the broken memories in your mind. Before you need our help, you have to first help us solve our purpose of coming here. Yun Nuoxing waved her hand and interrupted the scepter's consciousness. She pulled Hui and jumped out of the golden cauldron, leaving the old man standing there in a daze. Memories. The old man slowly sat down cross-legged. He looked at the broken scepter in a daze. He looked at the strange space. His eyes flashed with a golden color. He suddenly opened his mouth and said to himself, "The realm of the gods. Who is that? I have to warn them." Standing high in the sky and looking down at the twisted dark forest below, Hui tilted his head and looked at Yun Nuoxing. "Feng, are we just going to ignore it? Don't worry about it for the time being. It was an accident that we awakened that consciousness. However, it was also a witness and participant in the battle back then. Maybe it knows something that has been buried in history. Maybe it knows something about this world." Yun Nuoxing waved her long black hair. "It's an unexpected gain. However, it can't help much now. Let's wait for it to tidy up its memories first." Hui only felt a little dizzy. The process of thinking was obviously beyond his ability to think. I'm already dizzy. I've forgotten why I came to this world." Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes at him. "We found the tomb of the world's light in the depths of the void. We saw the giant guarding the tomb. This buried void might have something that the underworld wants, so we came in. We found that this place had been transformed into a breeding ground for the abyssal death mist. We found the core of the breeding ground and followed the world's light all the way to this world's light. Then we accidentally found that this was a special world and found the world of Sua. Now we are looking for the distortion point on the continent of Sua, looking for the reason why Sua is a special continent." Yun Nuoxing felt dizzy as she spoke. "So what are we doing?" "God knows. Hui was just a step away from foaming at the mouth. Anyway, I only know that we have deviated from our original goal." Yun Nuoxing crossed her arms. "Not necessarily. This world has been fighting against the abyssal death mist for so many years. Aren't you curious? If we can find some way to effectively counter the abyssal death mist on this continent of Sua." Hui sobered up a little and continued. "Will we have a higher chance of winning against the underworld? At least we won't die so miserably." Hui was speechless. Anyway, the underworld had that level of heavenly deity. They would die whether they fought or not. At least they could die with dignity. But if they were going to die, what was the use of dignity? Yun Nuoxing sighed. He had hidden something. His curiosity about this world mostly came from that voice. The voice had pulled him into a strange place for the second time. He always felt that that was the main purpose of his coming to this world. It was a very inexplicable feeling. It directly surged into his mind, bypassed his thinking process, and crashed into his mind and left a mark. Although it was a search, it was actually wandering around like a headless fly. He did not have any good ideas. There was no clear destination at all. So where should we go now? We looked around and looked in one direction. Go to find the land of hope? The place where that supreme person fell? Yun Nuoshing pondered for a moment and nodded. She said, "We have to go. But there's no rush. Now, let's see if the ancient royal family and the people of the realm of the gods have found anything." 139th Era, the realm of the gods. The blazing sun had temporarily set, and not a single cloud could be seen in the sky. Oh, that was nonsense. After being bombarded by the stars for such a long time, even the night had been blasted away. There wasn't even a trace of water vapor in the air. The mountains, rivers, and lakes in the Sourcepeak region and the extreme plain region had all evaporated, leaving behind only craters. Looking at the two regions, there wasn't even a single mountain over 100 meters tall to be found. The scorched earth and the air that exuded a strange stench, like the unique smell of farts mixed with something rotten. In short, it was disgusting. The two large regions had sunk hundreds of feet into the ground, with huge abysses all over the land and even penetrating the bottom of the world. The smallest of those huge craters was 10 billion miles wide, and the larger ones were even more exaggerated. Looking down from the sky, the two large regions were full of pockmarks as if they had grown a face full of pockmarks. If the land of some other world had endured such an impact, it would have been cut in half in a matter of minutes. It was said that the energy released at the moment when each star shone at its brightest was equivalent to the impact of splitting the world apart. So, here came the question. How many times was the energy released by the self-detonation of these massive objects tainted with the energy of the void when they crashed into the divine realm? In a single day, the divine realm had been split apart tens of billions of times. Golden brilliance was sprawled out on the edge of the Sourcepeak region. Behind him was Star Spirit City, which had been emptied but was still intact. He was panting like a dying dog, and his sweat had soaked the ground. There was still a faint black aura drifting around him, and the corpses of those huge monsters were slowly disappearing. Motherf ** Cur. Golden Brilliance was so tired that he cursed without any grace. He rolled his eyes and looked at the clear sky. The light was still very bright. The light of the detonated suns would stay here for a long time. It had even overshadowed the light of the two suns in the realm of the gods. Finally done. Ah, I can rest for a day. Forget it, one day it is. Jean. King 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 king. King 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 king. At the border between the Sourcepeak region and the Divine Prefecture, Yihong helped to stabilize the portal and expand it to the maximum extent. Below them were countless people who had passed through the portal. He watched as those people finally listened to his command and were being transferred to other regions. He could not help but let out a sigh of relief. These guardians who refused to give up until they saw the coffin finally knew what fear was after this wave of stars. Finally, their desire to live had been aroused. They could leave without being chased away. This was really a cause for celebration, a cause for celebration. What a cause for celebration! Damn it! Did they risk their lives like dogs in the borderlands just to escort these people who had no desire to live away from this place that had now become hell? Motherf * Cur. Cough, cough, as the saying goes, enduring for a while makes the wind calm. As an Empyrean god, he had to have his own demeanor and bearing. Thinking about it carefully, these things were not so serious. In the end, they all survived. This was a good result. He had saved hundreds of billions of lives. Thinking about it this way made him feel much better. You see, taking a step back, the more he thought about it, the angrier he got. How many people did they lose? Well, they were actually the people of the Guardian forces. However, they were forcefully pulled onto this chariot. It was not like they could jump off the chariot. Every soldier of the Guardian forces was a precious force. If he had not just learned that the Nine Gods Temple had prepared a special ceremony to protect those people, he would have destroyed the city under his feet. 10,000 people. At least 10,000. The Guardian forces had few people to begin with, and these 10,000 people had all died in the Sourcepeak domain. They were all Emperor gods, and there were even more who had died with them. However, he did not feel that the damned people of the latter deserved his pity at all. He had said all the good things, but they did not run away no matter what. Now, they were only willing to flee after letting the people of the Guardian forces die with them. What was this? What the hell was this? Damn it. Lord Yun. I know. What was that lord thinking? He was gnashing his teeth as he spoke. Yuan Feiyong and the others, who were connected to his spirit, fell silent for a moment. They were so tired that they were half dead, and even they had almost suffered heavy losses. It was easy to let one's imagination run wild when one was tired. They could not help but frown when they thought about the reports from the various forces of the Guardian forces. The entire Guardian forces had been reduced by nearly a third. What should they do next? There was still the rain of stars eyeing them covetously. What could they do by dragging out their last breaths for a day? No matter how powerful the spiritual temple was, they could not revive all 10,000 emperor gods in a day. Yuan Feiyong looked at the scorched earth outside the barrier of stars and could not help but sigh and shake his head. What a terrible price to pay. All of this could have been avoided. That female god could not help but sigh. Her eyes were full of complex emotions, and she did not know what to think. Inside the 9 temples, the Temple of Light was located in a group of illusory, cloud-like transparent buildings on the floating island. Temple Master Shui, Temple Master Guang, and some of the higher-ups of the Guardian forces walked into the main hall in the middle of the transparent buildings. The door that was pushed open slowly closed behind them. There seemed to be a heavy sound of the door closing, but nothing seemed to be heard. Wow. So this is the spiritual temple. What a miraculous place. Was it all built with spiritual power? Chu Yingzhan could not help but cry out in surprise when she walked into the place. Shu, little girl, this is the resting place of all the departed souls. Don't disturb their temporary rest. Temple Master Guang raised a finger in front of his mouth and whispered. Chu Yingzhan immediately stopped talking. Little Purple Soul and the other girls also quickly covered their mouths with their little hands to show that they would not make a fuss. The central hall was very spacious. Due to the restrictions of the power of laws, the space here was infinite. It extended endlessly and there was no end to it. It could accommodate as many people as it wanted. In the center of this spacious hall, there were rows of dim stars neatly arranged from bottom to top. There were thousands of stars, and there seemed to be no end to them. These stars were all fragments of a soul. They were fragments of a soul that had been separated from one's body and contained part of one's information. Even if one's body was destroyed outside, it could still be restored to its original state through this temple, and it would be the same. Little Star used forbidden methods and the power of the Observer and Guardian to create this distorted creation, the spiritual temple. Temple Master Jean looked up at the rows of stars and could not help but sigh. The 2 gods of the Xian family sighed and shook their heads. If it were not for the Observer's methods, I'm afraid that all of our Guardian forces would have been destroyed in this rain of stars. I can feel our aura. Golden Queen twisted her neck awkwardly and muttered, although I know it's because of the fragments of our souls that we left behind. I can feel mine too, Xian said. Boss. Nightmare's expression was a little strange. He sighed and did not know what to say. Chapter 1178. Faint whispers echoed through the transparent sacred palace, as if there were souls whispering something. The faint whispers lingered in everyone's ears, causing them to fall silent. After entering this place, they couldn't help but relax. However, not everyone relaxed. Chu Yingzhan felt her scalp tingle as she heard the whistling sounds that sounded like a great wind blowing through a narrow space. "These are the people who died in battle?" Qin Yen asked as she pointed at the shining stars. The barrier's consciousness's eyes flashed with a silver-blue light. He nodded. "They only have a few soul fragments left. It will take them 5 days to fully recover." "Then what is their condition now?" Golden Princess asked softly. "Dead." Everyone let out a sigh of relief. All right, this was within their expectations. If they did not die, how could they be revived? Palace Master Guang narrowed his eyes. "There won't be any injuries, right? For example, there will be a flaw in their soul. After all, only a soul fragment was left. Although it contains everything that they have, but—" The barrier's consciousness shook his head and said calmly, "2 divine roles and the primal chaos element will carry out this task. Together with the soul-suppressing lamp and the soul divine authority weapon, there will be no accident." Palace Master Shui let out a sigh of relief. His hands were clasped together nervously. "That's good. It will only take 5 days to recover. There are too few people guarding the Holy Palace. They can't afford such a large expenditure." Everyone was silent. The Holy Palace's guardian force was powerful, but there were too few people. Just 2 rounds of star rain had used up 1/3 of their strength. There were so many things after that. To hell with it. The godly spirit of the Imperial Ridge race was leaning on a walking stick. He looked like an old man and his back was bent low. He sighed heavily and said, "Cooperation is the right way. Why must there be so many broken things happening? If those people were willing to cooperate, there would be no need for such a complicated ceremony." "Elder Huang, what are you thinking of?" Palace Master Guang looked at him. Boom. The god spirit of the Royal Ridge race stamped his cane on the ground. Rays of energy spread out and formed some sort of pattern in the spiritual temple. It was a bit distorted, and the image displayed was ominous. And it was a bad omen at first glance. "Wow, what is this? What did this idiot do this time?" Chu Yingzhan jumped up and looked at the distorted images in shock. She couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Without waiting for the deity of the Emperor Ridge clan to reply, the consciousness of the barrier stepped forward and said in an emotionless voice, "The nodes of distortion. Every distortion is a proof that the spiritual temple has violated the laws of the world of gods." Hearing this, everyone felt a chill run down their spines. In this spacious hall, there were tens of thousands of warped nodes. Just how much did the spiritual temple twist the laws? And that wasn't all. Only the main hall of the spiritual temple was filled with the soul fragments used for resurrection. As for the other places, they were definitely not for decoration. The laws of the realm of the gods are very powerful. There aren't many laws that one would have to go against to resurrect a person. The barrier's consciousness stretched out a hand. The spiritual temple has a total of 35,000 warped nodes, which is the proof of all violations. As long as the spiritual temple exists, it will fight against the realm of the gods. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. It was the product of another mistake. Was this the method of the observer, or was it the method of the primal chaos deity? They couldn't tell. Ming's wings moved past a warped node. It was formless and untouchable. She faintly felt something, and her expression changed. She looked at the barrier's consciousness with a questioning gaze. Where do these warped nodes lead to? Everyone seemed to see the barrier's consciousness freeze for a moment. This emotionless person suddenly showed some human-like astonishment and hesitation, causing everyone to be stunned as well. "This god will say," before it could finish, Ming waved her hand and said, Don't use Big Brother as a shield. I know that Big Brother has given us the power to ask you such questions. The barrier's consciousness fell silent. Its empty eyes dimmed a little. It turned its head and looked outside. It was silent as if it didn't want to say anything. Ming smiled bitterly. She couldn't pry it open. This guy's mouth was sealed tight. Everyone shrugged. It was true. Logically speaking, such words would not be said. However, Ming's words made everyone a little curious. Which energy vein did these warped energy nodes lead to, and where did they lead to? The warped nodes are all connected to the concept layer of the realm of the gods, the bottom of the sea of precept. The barrier's consciousness suddenly said something, and everyone was stunned. That guy actually said the answer. The bottom of the sea of precept. This answer sounded like a fantasy, and it deviated from the answer they had guessed. They thought that it would involve that idiot. Finally, it connects to the soul of this god through the two divine positions. See, this answer is much more normal. It does involve that idiot. Everyone's eyes widened. Xian quickly said, "Will this affect Little Star in any way? I mean, there is a price to pay for going against the natural order to resurrect a person. Did Little Star bear this price?" Yes. The barrier's consciousness nodded. Little Star knew about this, but he still brought out the spiritual temple? Yuan she couldn't help but ask. Yes. Then what is the price? Boss bore all the cost. What is the price? Nightmare's eyes widened. The barrier's consciousness fell silent again. This time, it stayed silent for a long time. 20 to 30 people stared at it. After a long time, it finally spoke. There was a moment of emotion in its voice. Bearing the sins of the world, from going against the natural order to resurrect a person is the price this god has to pay. Xian felt a headache coming. It wasn't the first time he heard these words, but he had no idea what they were. Then what is the sins of the world? Before the barrier's consciousness could speak, the god from the Xian family said, "I think I know something about it." Elder Xian, what is it?" Hallmaster Guang asked. The god closed his eyes and pondered for a while. The barrier's consciousness glanced at him and didn't answer. It seemed to be waiting for his answer. "I saw these words in the handbook of the ancestor of the Xian family. Every living being born in this world, in the Deyuan realm, has an independent cause and effect. Because they bear this cause and effect, regardless of whether it is good or bad, they will have an equal share of sins. Every sin is like the cause and effect, it belongs to a single person. If you look for the source of sins individually, you won't be able to find the source of sins. However, if you look across the entire land of life, you will find the existence of sins. So, the birth of this life is a sin? Is it the same as the evil of human nature?" Golden Queen scratched her head. No. It was the voice of the barrier's consciousness. Everyone turned to look at him. The god from the Xian family clasped his hands respectfully and said, "Your Honor, please enlighten us. The sins of the world is nothing. It has nothing to do with human nature. It is the dark side of the world, and it can also be said to be the visualization of the dark side of all living beings. Humans will have negative emotions and positive emotions. For this reason, everything in the world is classified as a dark side and a bright side. Similarly, the world has a bright side and a dark side. However, they are not bright and evil as described in common sense. The dark side is a concept, and the bright side is also a concept. All living beings, can only come into contact with the bright side that you are in now. It is the same for the void. The dark side is the eternal shadow of the bright side, lurking in the shadow. All living beings in the world are born with the sins of the world. They are like shadows that cannot be shaken off. Even if they disappear, they will only settle in the world of the dark side, accumulating in the dark side of the Deyuan realm, and will never be destroyed. The birth and destruction of the world, The arrival and disappearance of living beings are like the ebb and flow of the tide. The sins of the world, that have accumulated over countless years, will never dissipate in the Dun realm's void. Everyone was a little confused when they heard this. After pondering for a long time, they finally understood. To be specific, the so-called sins of the world was to use a world of light as an analogy. It was like a soap bubble. What they could see normally was the soap bubble itself. The shadow that the soap bubble projected on the ground under the sun was the dark side of the world. There were thousands of living beings in the soap bubble, and in the dark side, there would be shadows of thousands of living beings. When they died, the shadows would accumulate in the dark side and settle down. That was the sins of the world. Every shadow was a part of the sins of the world. They followed all living beings like shadows, and no one could escape from it because it was their shadow, the dark matter, that accompanied them when they were born in this world. Alright, now we finally understand what the so-called sins of the world are. The Golden Queen flicked her feather coat and said, "Then what does this have to do with Little Star?" When she said this, most of the people looked at her as if they were looking at an idiot. She just said that every time someone was resurrected, another sins of the world would be born. So that's how it is. The birth of life would give birth to new sins of the world. If those people were resurrected this time, new sins of the world would be born. As the price, Yun-Nuashing would have to bear those things that did not sound like anything good. The Golden Queen also reacted. She did not feel embarrassed at all. She rolled her eyes and continued, "How much did Little Star bear? Are these things harmful or beneficial?" "Bah, what nonsense are you talking about? How can these things, which do not sound like anything good, be beneficial?" Everyone was speechless and covered their eyes. They couldn't bear to listen to this. It was as if they had schizophrenia. A lot, so much that it is unimaginable. The barrier's consciousness lowered its eyelids and said, "In this world, there is no second person who can bear that kind of weight. Even the heavenly God of the origin cannot do it. Is the sins of the world that difficult to bear with the weight of 10,000 people?" Hallmaster Guang frowned and said, "Although I don't know much, the 9 divine temples also have obscure records. It seems to say that a drop of the sins of the world is enough to collapse the galaxy and the void." Kai Xia's heart skipped a beat. She could not help but ask, "How much is a drop?" "Just a little bit. After all, each life does not have to bear much. Maybe it is even smaller than this little bit." Hallmaster Guang pinched a drop of energy liquid with his thumb and little finger. Yes, it was really a drop. It was not sure if it was the size of 1,000th of a fingernail. If one did not open their eyes wide, they would not be able to see it. It was even smaller than a speck of dust. Just a little bit. That's not too accurate, it's really very small. However, it's said that just a little bit of this thing is enough to crush the earth, mountains, stars, galaxies, and even the void. Even a god-emperor would not be able to withstand such a tiny bit. However, no one would come into contact with it normally. According to the records and the Lord of Consciousness's words, this thing usually resides in the dark side world. It would only take on that form when it manifests itself in this world. It would not come into contact with anything else, Hallmaster Guang said. But Little Star is now bearing the weight of 10,000 people's sins of the world. That weight. Kai Xia? What's wrong? Before the Golden Princess could finish her sentence, Kai Xia fell to the ground with a pale face. She held her breath. She remembered that the part that Yun-Nuashing manifested for her was only the tip of the iceberg. She almost could not breathe. Feng quickly helped Kai Xia up. "What's wrong?" "That idiot, he. Kai Xia trembled as she told Feng what she saw that day. The liquid ball, that was 10 feet in size, was only the tip of the iceberg. After that, the entire space fell silent. It was only then that everyone understood what the Stronghold's consciousness meant by its words earlier. Additional was only a relative term. Without a reference point, there was no way to tell exactly how much more there was. It was only now that rosy dawn brought out that reference point. I came into contact with the sins of the world in the ancient age. Since then, I have been bearing the weight of the dark side. The dark side of all life. I can't tell how much it is. I did not tell me. Perhaps it is the weight of the entire 8 elements realm, and it has been accumulating until now. I have become the carrier of the sins of the world. All the sins of the world that were born after that, and all the sins of the world that were born in the 8 elements realm fell on my body. I could not escape from it. The consciousness of the barrier said blandly, I have almost reached my limit. Even the billions of reincarnated bodies could not bear the increasing sins of the world anymore. Then we'll die. Chu Chun blurted out this sentence in a moment of stupor, and was immediately suppressed by his 2 sisters. Die? What is death? The consciousness of the barrier laughed weirdly. Death is a release, but it does not mean a new life. Since I have borne the sins of the world of the 8 elements realm, I will not die. This world does not allow me to die. I am a permanent guest in the eternal reincarnation. I have to live forever even if I have to go against the reincarnation. The sins of the world that have been entangled with my divine soul. I will be the carrier forever unless I can find a suitable replacement. But no one in this world can bear that weight. One day, I will be overwhelmed by the sins of the world and fall into madness again. If there were no elements of chaos, I might have already fallen into madness. The consciousness of the barrier sighed. Wait, you said again? What do you mean by again? Ming clenched his fist. The consciousness of the barrier was silent for a moment. It suddenly looked down at the ground and said, Have you heard of the 1st element realm and the 2nd element realm? Have you been there? I have heard of them. There are 8 realms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But I have never been there. The 2nd element realm and the 2nd element realm are too far away. The Golden Empress said, Oh, it's okay. You can't go there anymore. That place has become history forever. The consciousness of the barrier raised its head and showed a terrifying expression. When I first bore the sins of the world, I did not have the billions of reincarnated bodies to bear it. The elements of chaos were not strong enough. Of course, I lost control and balance. The 2nd element realm and the 2nd element realm became an eternal wasteland. The 2nd element realm has been destroyed forever. Everyone was speechless. When they heard this, they did not know what to say. There was once a guy who was either a human or a god who proposed a theory. He said that the gods of the 8 element realm had enough power to destroy the 2nd element realm and the 3rd element realm as well as the 2nd element realm. That was probably a theory put forward in the ancient times. No one would have thought that in the ancient times, the quarter moon had already destroyed the 2nd element realm and the 2nd element realm. Is that the eternal proof of sin left behind by Little Star? The Golden Empress was sweating all over. The hot wind outside made her feel as if she had fallen into an ice cave. No. That is the proof of the destruction of the sins of the world. It is not my power. I only released it through my own hand. The consciousness of the barrier said. Its voice returned to its indifferent and emotionless tone. There is no way to find out the cause and effect. The only thing that can be confirmed is that it was not my intention to pursue it. It was just a strange thing that I accidentally got involved with. Nightmare handed Yuan Shi a piece of cloth. Yuan Shi wiped the sweat off his face. He thought for a moment and simply put the cloth on his face. Soon, it was soaked with sweat. Oh my God, that is to say, the sins of the world of 10,000 people, compared to the sins of the little star. Yuan Shi smiled bitterly. Everyone was confused. It turned out that it was just a weaker part. It was so weak that it was negligible. You can rest assured. The consciousness of the barrier said calmly, The billions of reincarnated bodies and the elements of chaos in this world are enough to fight against the sins of the world. The possibility of my madness is very low. No, no, no. Since the boss became like that, it was a little strange. Nightmare waved his hand vigorously and jumped up and down. You didn't see it. When the boss was like that, he was no different from a demon. What? Before he could finish, he was slapped out of the spiritual temple by Shi-E. The little girl's face turned red. You are not allowed to talk about Big Brother. Everyone looked at Nightmare, who was unlucky and flew out. They all mourned for 1 or 2 seconds. God knows why there was no problem when anyone said something like that, but when Nightmare said something like that, Shi-E had such a big reaction. I just said it. Palace Master Jean had already thought it through. The sins of the world are the dark side of this world. The unknown substance that manifests from the dark side of all life can be understood as containing the nature of all dark sides, right? The consciousness of the barrier nodded. It is normal for my personality to change. From a certain point of view, I have been merged with the sins of the world for so many years. Even if my rationality is not taken away, I will still be affected to some extent. One is marked by the company one keeps. Ming frowned worriedly. Yes. Everyone sighed. The consciousness of the barrier suddenly raised its head and looked at Ming. Your key is the only solution to the lock in his heart. Ming was startled. She pondered carefully for a moment, and it was as if she had been enlightened. She finally understood the use of the heart lock that hung around their hearts. The so-called keeping watch over him was to help him break free from the sins of the world, but she would rather never have to use this method. Chapter 1179. Ziyen came out of the spiritual temple, and with little purple soul in her bosom, she looked to the left and right. After confirming that there was no one around, she hastily ran outside without making any sound. Behind her, through the crack of the door that was about to close, she could see Temple Head Guang and the people of the Protector Force discussing something. Hey, run, run! Little Purple Soul waved its little hands in Ziyan's arms. Its little face was filled with unconcealable happiness and excitement. Ziyan felt helpless when he saw this. He turned around and carefully glanced at the tightly shut doors of the sacred palace. Only then did he relax and run outside. Sister Ziyan, where are you going? A leisurely voice accompanied by a faint hymn sounded from the front. Ziyan was startled. The little girl also cried out in alarm and quickly covered her eyes. She didn't dare to see what was going to happen next. Ziyan's face was covered in cold sweat as she looked to the side. Ming was sitting on a pillar in the spiritual temple, looking down at them from above. Golden Mei Mao shone brightly as if she could see through everything. Flapping her wings, Ming floated down from the pillar and landed beside Ziyan. She looked at her and whispered, "Are you going out?" Ziyan laughed dryly. "Weren't you in there just now?" Ming's expression became a little strange. Golden Mei Mao looked at Ziyan suspiciously. She felt that her sister, who was 3 or 4 years older than her, was becoming more and more like her brother. She sneaked away. "My brother asked me to take care of you. Where are you going?" "I'm going too." Ziyan stuck out her little tongue and propped up the little girl who was covering her eyes. Hey, didn't this little girl just say that she saw a continent flying into the divine realm? She insisted on taking a look. It just so happens that the meteor shower has stopped and we have a day to rest. Little Star's clone also said that there wouldn't be any upheaval on this day, so she's going to take a look. Oh. Ming nodded and turned to stand beside her. Let's go. Then, the 3 girls ran away side by side. Come back before the next meteor shower starts. Also be careful. The divine realm is in chaos right now. Don't go anywhere. As the 3 girls ran away, Hall Master Shui's gentle voice rang in their ears. Ming did not feel anything, but Ziyan and Little Purple Soul stuck their tongues out. They thought that they were sneaking away secretly, but they did not expect to be seen by others, they really saw it. At least 80% of the people in the spiritual temple knew that the two girls had sneaked out. They could not help but sigh at how the observer's little girlfriend was influenced by him and tried to sneak out like him. Leaving that aside, Xian and Ming brought Little Purple Soul and Little Magic to the one-way portal in the spiritual temple. Oh, and Xiao Xian too. The little fox had become Xian's binding scarf, and had been brought along by them ever since Yun Nuoxing fell into that state. The place they were going to this time was actually quite far away. According to Little Purple Soul, the otherworldly continent had rushed past the divine realm and was eventually captured by the divine realm. It was still drifting at the edge of the divine realm. Well, according to the little girl, it was still spinning at a frightening speed. As for how it was spinning, whether it was rotating by itself or by revolution, horizontally or diagonally, they would only know when they got there. Now that the divine realm was in chaos, they did not plan to ask anyone for help. The Guardian faction was busy, and Xian and the others were probably not interested. So, the three of them went out together. This combination was actually, well, it was the first time the three of them went out together. After a little preparation, Xian and Ming stood in the teleportation hall of the Water God's temple. There was not much to prepare. The purple-red pendant hanging in front of Xian's chest was enough to protect her, so it did not take long for them to leave through the portal. At the same time, Little Purple Soul was smelling the otherworldly continents sent through the portal. She was really smelling it. Xian and Ming were amazed. This was the first time they had seen such a method of sensing. Found it. It's here. Here. Little Purple Soul suddenly jumped up and pulled Xian and Ming forward excitedly. When they reached the portal, they saw it. It was the portal that led to the border between the realm of Zenith and the realm of Ganyuan. Originally, the portal would not be located there, but now that the realm of Zenith and the realm of Ganyuan had been destroyed, and the portals could not be removed casually, Temple Master Shui and the others took some emergency measures and moved all the portals to the border. Ahem, this is the irresponsible operator of the portal. We are about to go through the portal. The teleportation process will be very fast and you will feel a little dizzy. Please stand firm and support yourselves. Don't blame me if you fall, hee. As soon as Ziyen and the other two passed through the transfer gate, they heard a voice gently ring in their ears. They were stunned for a moment, and before they could identify whose voice it was, they felt a faint sense of dizziness, like seasickness. They closed their eyes and took a few deep breaths. When the feeling faded and they opened their eyes again, they had already left the 9 shrine space. Ziyen hurriedly turned her head and saw a little girl wearing a black and white dress standing in front of her. Her long black hair and wine-red hair were fluttering in the wind, and her wide sleeves completely covered her arms. It was Yi Shi. She was currently looking at the two of them with a smile. Sister Ziyan, Sister Kuming, where are you going to play? Ziyan's expression was a bit strange. She felt that something wasn't right to be called sister by a girl who looked to be only 11 or 12 years old, but whose soul was already several 100,000 years old. She recalled Yun Nua's words, "To an undying, those who care about age are all fools." She patted Yi Shi's head in relief. Then, she felt even more strange. Yi Shi was not an immortal yet. Yeah, we're taking Little Purple Soul somewhere. Why did you follow us? Xian shook her head and decided to ignore the questions. Nothing. I saw you sneaking out, so I followed you out of curiosity, Yi Shi said with a grin. Yi Shi giggled as she spoke. Her wine-red eyes caught sight of something, and she hurriedly pointed to the sky. Look over there. Xian and Ming turned their heads. They saw it as soon as they came out. After all, it was such a large area that they could see it anywhere. It was a scorched land, and the whole land was emitting a very high temperature. The air was dry, and there was no water vapor. There was only white water vapor that was hot enough to evaporate a high-level god. It was like a spring morning. With the weak sunlight, endless fog could be seen, and the scorched land was only a corner of it. Further away, a bright and dazzling magma lake spanned tens of thousands of miles. The dazzling golden lake reflected the sky into gold and red. A large amount of gas that didn't smell good filled the air and rose into the air. Together with the smell of rotten eggs and farts in the sky, it made the world even more indescribable. It was so smelly that Ziyin felt a little nauseous and a little nauseous. A faint golden light transformed into a faint barrier that enveloped the area around them. Accompanied by a faint hymn, it was as if an angel was whispering into their ears. It was dispelled by the holy power, and the strange smell finally disappeared. The ultimate plain region that was destroyed by the rain of stars. Yishi's face was slightly pale. This once magnificent land was known as the border between thousands of mountains. It was like spring for thousands of years, and the ultimate plain region was green. Now, looking at it, mountains? No, they were all hills and mounds. None of the mountains were more than 10 feet tall. There was no more greenery in sight, only scorched black and golden yellow. They had been in the temple all this time, listening to the reports from everywhere. They listened to the shocking and unbelievable battle, but those were far inferior to what they saw with their own eyes. Although they could not tell at a glance how powerful those big guys were, at least they knew how destructive those things were. At this moment, the land before them was divided into two. The scorched land and magma on the left and the land of the Ganyuan region on the right were separated by a distance of several thousand feet. The height of several thousand feet had long disappeared. Looking at it from high up in the sky, it was like looking at a cliff that towered into the clouds. I've been to these places before. The endless greenery would make people mistakenly think that they had entered a paradise isolated from the rest of the world. It was a paradise for demons, a habitat for demons, and a place to hide. As long as they had the power to defeat the demons in that place, they would be able to find a good place to live. The ultimate plain region was like that, with the richest greenery and life in the entire God realm. But now, Yishi sighed softly. The land before her eyes was already shattered, no longer looking like it did in her memories. It had been destroyed. It was not just the ultimate plain region, but the Sourcepeak region as well. Yun Nuoshing once said that 8% of the lives were destroyed in the 2 waves of the rain of stars. In the end, there was a discrepancy, but that was not the main point. The lives here were mostly humans and demons. There were many more lives among them. It was not that he did not count them, but it was useless to count them, because there were too many lives in a large region. It was not that he did not count them, but it was useless to count them, because there were too many lives in a large region. This is still considered good. The void mist did not spread. It should have all gathered at the place that golden brilliance handled. Ming Ming blinked her eyes. This messy land was already messy enough. There was nothing more to say. Right now, the most important thing was to see if there were any more dangerous things left behind. However, from what she could see, there weren't any. Her power was very sensitive to those disgusting things that were black wherever she went and possessed enormous destructive power. Well, let's not worry about that for now. Let's go there first. Little Purple Soul tugged at Zian's sleeve. In this somewhat serious place, the little girl could not smile. She quickly said, "Sister Zian, let's go." "Yes, let's go." "Hey, wait a minute. Look at that." Zian nodded and hugged the little girl. Just as she was about to fly in the direction she went, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. It was something that should be extremely dazzling. There were countless stars in the galaxy, and it was a sun. It used to be a sun, but now the giant liquid ball was only 1/3 of its original size. It was lying quietly in the middle of a mountain range. Turbulent energy was still bursting out from it, and it seemed to be connected to the other 2/3. What was exposed was just a cross-section. From where they were now, it looked like a sun hanging on the horizon. For some reason, its light was very dim, so dim that they could see the patterns on its surface. It didn't explode, Or is it a sun that has been blown to pieces? Ming could not help but squint. The light had become very dim. It was fine to look at it from the corner of one's eyes, but if one stared at it directly and kept staring, one's eyes might be blinded. If Brother Nua is here, he should be able to come up with a few hundred words of explanation, Yi she said. Xian and the others looked away after staring at the shattered sun for a while. Before Little Purple Soul could urge them again, they quickly flew in the direction the little girl pointed at. They were currently flying along the southern border between the Ganyuan region and the Ganyuan region. If there were no accidents, they should be heading straight for the southern ice realm. At this distance, they could already feel the cold wind coming from the southern ice realm's eternal glacier. When they looked up, they could see a thick cloud of ice in the distant sky that radiated to an unknown distance. That's strange. The southern ice realm's sky-shrouding cloud doesn't cover such a large area, Yi she said, wrinkling her nose. So many things have happened in the celestial realm recently. Something strange might have happened in the southern ice realm, Ming said. Brother isn't here, and there are many things that we can't explain. Wait. The hollow voice surprised Xian and the others. Little Purple Soul also muttered gloomily. The space in front of them rippled slightly, and a figure slowly appeared. It had black hair, black robes, and armor. It was the consciousness of the barrier. It looked at Xian and the others and said, "An undetectable change has happened in the southern ice realm. Don't go near it for now." Xian replied in a small voice. Is it serious? I don't know. It might have something to do with my failure in the past, but I'm not sure myself. The consciousness shook its head. Then, can you send us to the back of this ice continent? Little Purple Soul pointed in the direction of the southern ice realm. Yeah, I don't think it's a big deal. Yeah, we're going to the back, to the outer space continent. The consciousness's eyes flashed, and it nodded. It waved its hand, and a spatial portal appeared in front of it. It led to the Endless Star region. That's right, the place behind the southern ice realm was close to the edge of the celestial realm. An undetectable change has happened in the north of the center of the southern ice realm. Don't go near it, but it doesn't conflict with the place you're talking about. You can go there without worry. The hollow voice of the consciousness echoed. Have a safe trip. After that, it slowly disappeared into the air. Xian and the others couldn't help but smile bitterly. Why were they being watched everywhere they went? Was it because of Little Star? Well, it was probably because of that. After passing through the teleportation gate, when the dizziness subsided once more, what appeared before everyone's eyes was a vast and boundless star field. The star field they could see from this direction was the cluster of light that the God realm was currently in. Looking out from the southern ice realm, the star field they could see was still peaceful and undisturbed by the world fragment. Speaking of the world fragment, Xian and the others tacitly turned around and looked behind them. The first thing they saw was the transparent celestial realm. The consciousness of the celestial realm might have been worried, so it threw them a little further away. They were right outside the celestial realm, and they saw the rippling celestial realm. 2 or 3 layers of barriers covered the celestial realm. That was the final defense of the pillar of creation. It was only with its help that the celestial realm was able to withstand the 2 waves of meteor shower. Their line of sight once again looked into the distance, past the twinkling stars floating in the darkness and into the depths of the vast sea of stars. In an extremely distant place, a thin white line traversed the entire star field in their line of sight. It was not very bright, but it was unusually conspicuous. It was as if they had seen something wrong with the world itself. A world fragment. That's... Ming could not help but take a deep breath. This was the first time she had seen such a thing. In the star field, standing in a world sphere of light, that thing that was the size of a world sphere of light was almost infinite. Standing in front of it, one could feel the entire world pressing down on them. Yes, that was what her brother had said. She herself did not know what it felt like to have the entire world pressing down on her. There, I see it. Little Purple Soul excitedly pointed its little finger at the realm of the gods. Yen and the others quickly turned their eyes to the realm of the gods, which had become transparent like a mirage. In the middle of the endless ice realm and the dark galaxy there was a planet, a complete planet. It was enveloped by a huge energy barrier, and the energy that was emitting a faint mist-like aura shrouded the planet. It was incredible. It had experienced the impact of the stars and came from the depths of the galaxy. Not to mention whether it had been hit by the world fragment, it had rushed through such a long distance and landed here, and it was still intact. It had been captured by the realm of the gods and rushed into the interior of the order barrier. This barrier was somewhat lacking in integrity, so it was somewhat resistant to outsiders knowing about the existence of the realm of the gods. But if something really rushed into the realm of the gods, it would not do anything to stop it or take any other actions. The serious deviation in functionality caused people to really want to call it chicken ribs. But when they remembered that it was something left behind by the first great deity, they forcibly swallowed back those two words. They could only pretend that it was really very powerful, so powerful that it had casually captured a planet and brought it here. As the realm of the gods was a little blurry in their sight, even the planet was a little blurry. Xian and the others could not see the details of the planet's surface so clearly with their eyesight. They could vaguely make out some of the things on the planet's surface just by looking at the blurry outline. It was a blue-green planet with mountains, lakes, seas, and clouds. Compared to the planet they, to be specific, Ming and the others saw in the realm of the five elements, it was a little smaller. That planet. Ming had forgotten the name of the planet, but she remembered seeing a few moons in the sky at night. There is the aura of the beginning of the world. Little Purple Soul suddenly said, and everyone was stunned. Why are you copying your brother's words? Xian ruffled the little girl's hair and asked, What do you mean? She thought for a moment and said, It probably means that this planet has experienced the moment when a world of light was born, so it was tainted with the presence of that moment. It's very rare, and basically only continents and planets without a foundation would be tainted. Just like the divine realm, which is eternal and does not have a fixed world of light as a foundation. When a world of light is destroyed, it will float in the void and eventually enter another world of light, or another world of light will be born in the same place. After experiencing that moment, it will be tainted with the presence of that moment of creation. The nature is very similar to the realm of the gods and the aura of time. Shi frowned. It's very old, very old. It's so old that it will fade with time. I can't say, but it should have an aura that is older than an era. Chapter 1180. A thick aura of time permeated the starry sky like a bowl of thick soup. Ordinary people would not be able to see it, but with a little bit of effort, they would be able to notice that something was wrong here. The power of time was something that even the emperor gods could not fully control. They could barely even touch it. However, Shi did not need to control the power of time. She only needed to take something out of Xian's pendant. The time orb. Yes, the power left behind by Yun Nuoshing. It was a Godspark weapon made from the power of time. Now, with it, she could clearly see the space around her and what time was like. What was the sea of time like? Those who had not experienced it personally would probably associate it with the sea. A golden sea, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, and in the distance, blue water and blue sky. But in reality, what one could see after entering the sea of time were two endless golden seas, the sky and the earth. The distance between the two seas was equal to infinity or zero. Or it could be said that there was no such thing as distance at all. There was no such thing as sky and earth. It was just a concept of up and down. If one was in the open space in the middle, one could only see the endless darkness in the distance. At this moment, the time origin bead displayed such a scene in front of them. The golden ocean was surging violently above and below. Each fold was a wave that spanned hundreds of meters and hundreds of years. However, these two seas of time were not as endless as the real seas of time. They spread out from the planet in front of Ziyin and the others and extended into this star field. Like a whirlpool, they spat out endless time aura. I have never seen such a scene. The barrier's consciousness was standing beside Ziyin and the others. It had just emerged and was alarmed when the time orb's power manifested such a scene. Looking at this somewhat exaggerated scene, it was almost scared out of its wits. My original self has traveled through the sea of time countless times. My memories contain his true memories of the sea of time. Just like what you see in front of you, it's completely the same. You can't tell the difference. This has even become a second sea of time. Ziyin and the others were also astonished when they heard this. It was also the first time they had seen it. Well, that was nonsense. They had only experienced it for a few decades, so how could they have seen it all? Well, they were just very surprised. It was not so much the first time they had seen such a scene, but the first time they had seen the appearance of the Sea of Time. That planet has become the carrier of endless time. The time it carries is very distant, so distant that it is even more distant than my existence. It can no longer be speculated, the barrier's consciousness said calmly. The corner of Yi Shi's eye twitched. A time even further back than that. It was born in the primordial era, and the exact time was still unknown. It was probably after Quarter Moon had become a peak heavenly god, and even further back than that she couldn't think about it anymore, afraid that she would touch on some taboo. The barrier's consciousness was silent for a moment. After a moment, it looked at Ziyin and nodded at them. Its figure gradually dissipated, as if it was not interested in this place for the time being. Wait a minute. Since you're here, why don't you go in with us and have a look? Yi Shi quickly said before it completely dissipated. The barrier's half-dissipated figure regained its solid form. It looked at her, and its hollow voice slowly said, I'm dealing with the matter of the barrier of creation, accelerating its energy release. I want to release as much energy as possible before the next meteor shower. The thing in front of you is just a reflection. It won't take up much of the main body's information space. But if the main body goes, Yi Shi felt uncomfortable listening to it. She waved her hand before it finished. Stop, stop, stop. Who asked your main body to come with us? You can just send a reflection to come with us. It can collect some information for Brother Nua, and it can also answer our questions. The barrier's consciousness was silent for a moment. It was stunned. Yi Shi looked at it with a strange expression. You didn't think of that? The barrier's eyes turned to the side, and its voice was stiff. The reflection only takes up part of the mind, and the speed of thinking is slow. Ah, it admitted it. Yi Shi and Ziyin could not help but burst out laughing. There was a flash of silver light in its eyes. After a moment, it nodded. Its illusory figure flickered with a faint light. With a popping sound like a bubble, its figure suddenly shrank to the size of a palm. It was the kind of little person with a big head and a small body. Ziyin and the others' eyes lit up. It was like a miniature version of Little Star. They wanted to reach out and poke it a few times. The barrier's consciousness gently landed on Little Purple Soul's head. It looked at them and said in its hollow voice, Let's go in this way. You're really interested in this extraterrestrial planet? Yi Shi was a little surprised. I just said it casually. It doesn't matter whether I'm interested or not. The barrier's consciousness lowered its head and said faintly, I'm just fulfilling my mission to watch over the realm of the gods for the main body. It's necessary to take a look at this extraterrestrial thing. Can't you just look at it directly? Ziyin said. She knew Yun Nuoxing's ability as an observer. She could see any corner of the realm of the gods with a single glance. No one could escape from her sight. The barrier's consciousness shook its head. This planet has a powerful barrier that distorts reality and time. It might even cut off the continuity of space. Even if it rushes into the realm of the gods, the observer's eye will not be able to see what's inside. Barrier? Xian and the others were stunned. The barrier's consciousness pointed at the planet in front of them. At the top of the blue-green planet, there was a layer of faint golden membrane that was emitting a faint light. It floated at the top of the planet and covered the entire planet. If it really had the ability to cut off the continuity of space, it would completely separate the inside from the outside world. Yes, it's that layer of eggshell. Little Purple Soul nodded. She observed for a while. After a minute, she waved her hand and carefully descended with Xian and the others. They first entered the space of the realm of the gods, then slowly approached the blue-green planet. As they got closer, the planet became bigger and bigger in their eyes. They could already see the shape of another piece of land. Looking at it from this angle, they felt an inexplicable sense of awe and grandeur. It was as if they were not approaching the piece of land, but the piece of land that was crashing towards them. Even though it was not as tall as Tianmu Peak, it was not a joke, it was real. The planet was currently floating at the edge of the southern ice realm. The bottom of the planet was still tens of thousands of miles away from the ice mountain that was piercing into the realm of the stars. From this angle, it was impossible to measure the distance. The top of the planet was not even touching the sky-shrouding cloud of the southern ice realm. However, the top of Tianmu Peak was above the sky-shrouding cloud, and it was a very long distance away. It was almost touching the top of the realm of the god. It was one of the tallest mountains in the realm of the god. The planet was relatively large, but it was a few times smaller than what Ming and the others saw in the realm of the five elements. Xian and the others' realm of the laws carefully connected with the layer of golden eggshell. When the two came into contact, it was like two bubbles coming into contact with each other. The bigger one did not move, but the smaller one expanded a little. Faint ripples spread from the point of contact and slowly spread to other parts of the eggshell. A moment later, under their nervous gazes, the small circle of bubbles squeezed into the eggshell. Then, the entire golden eggshell suddenly shone as if it had exploded. It became as dazzling as the sun, and they felt as if they were going into the sun. The space around them was strangely distorted, solidifying and cracking as if there was a force that was preventing them from entering. Don't worry, it's just a phenomenon caused by the energy collision between two worlds. It's a big commotion, but it's not destructive. Just as Xian and the others could not help but feel nervous, the barrier's consciousness said flatly. The truth seemed to be as it said. Even though the commotion was so great that even Xian was worried that the shining eggshell would suddenly explode, it was still a daunting experience. They smoothly squeezed into the eggshell, and then there was no then. As they squeezed into the turquoise planet, the golden eggshell that shone across the sky abruptly disappeared. Those golden ripples and shining radiance were completely gone. They floated steadily in the air, and everything around them was calm. Looking up, they saw a blue sky and white clouds, with a sun hanging in the sky. Xian was absolutely certain that it was not the sun of the divine realm. The orientation was wrong, and based on the position of the turquoise planet, they should be able to see a planetary system when they looked up, and the grandeur of the North Ice Realm at the edge of the world. However, there was only blue sky and white clouds and nothing else. Looks like it's just a false alarm. Ming sensed the calm energy around him, and looked up at the strange sky. Looks like the space here is really completely isolated from the outside world. That's right. The ripples of the space are completely different, and this space, the way the dimensional power flows. The barrier's empty eyes quickly scanned the planet and said flatly, "It's gone through many great changes." She looked at the big and small cute thing on Little Purple Soul's head, and could not help but twitch. "What do you mean?" "Based on your understanding, It's like the changing of the era, with the breath of the era and the breath of the great samsara. That's right, this world is filled with the breath of changing generations. Not just the changing of the era, there's also a lot of information that can't be processed. The barrier's consciousness shook its head, and then said in a more solemn voice, at least to Yi Shi and the others, the void of this world is solidified. If my calculations are correct, it should be brought here. Be clear. Yi Shi held her head helplessly. It really was Brother Nua's clone. Even his words were so hurried. The big and small cute thing looked up at her and said flatly, the world light in the void is a cluster of bubbles. There is also the existence of the void in the world light, but it is separated by the world barrier, and is only at the bottom of the world light. However, the void there exists within the void. It's like throwing a kettle into a lake, the water is the void, and when the water flows into the kettle itself is the world barrier, separating the inside from the outside, and the void that flows into the kettle will be placed at the bottom of the dimension. When a normal world light moves away from its position in the void inside and outside will change, and a part of the water in the kettle will flow out, and a new part will flow in. However, this world is a kettle with a sealed kettle, and there is no exchange between the inside and the outside. Although it's only the size of this planet, we can still confirm that this void has been completely sealed and solidified. Yi Shi pondered for a moment and understood. In other words, the void here is an ancient void, and it has existed for a long time. The barrier's consciousness was silent for a moment, and then nodded. You can say that. However, there is no such thing as age in the void. It is like flowing lava that has solidified into rock, and it is usually used to determine the void. According to your understanding, age is used to determine its active state, and only sealed voids have this method of determining age, because the void is not static, and it is always changing. Alright, that's enough. We're not going to study the void anyway. Yi Shi waved her hand with a headache. Can we go down now? Xian looked up at the distant sky. They were still floating at the top of the planet, and the air was thin, but it was not a big problem. She was just worried that if they went deeper, something would happen to this world. It was a strange change. She also stopped to listen to the barrier's consciousness, which was like Yun Nuashing, babbling in a language she could not understand. The energy collision between the two worlds has ended. Everything is fine. The barrier's consciousness nodded. Little Purple Soul waved her hands, and excitedly pulled on Xian's arm. She looked at the sea of clouds in the distance and giggled. Sister Xian, let's go down and have a look. Xian and the other two looked at the little girl helplessly. They could not figure out what the little girl was so excited about. Be careful. This is a strange world, and we've experienced. Xian thought for a moment, and then knocked her head. It was a very exciting journey. We've been caught from the depths of the galaxy, and we don't know what the people inside will do. It would be bad if they think we're invaders. The observer's eye has scanned this planet, and it did not find any worldwide commotion. It might be because of the barrier. Before the barrier's consciousness could finish speaking, Yi Shi added with a horrified expression, Don't tell me those people don't know that the land they're standing on has traveled tens of billions of light years to reach this place. Theoretically, yes. The barrier's consciousness nodded and said, There is no contamination of the void mist. Don't worry. Ziyen and the other two didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This was really, to what extent was this barrier severed? Even their own home, it was really their home. Wasn't the world they had lived in for countless years their home? They didn't even know that they had flown so far away. They really didn't know whether they were thick-skinned or ignorant. Let's talk to the locals first. Yi Shi did not know whether to laugh or cry. She was about to step forward when she suddenly saw her dress. Her expression changed, and she quickly looked at the barrier's consciousness. Will this dress make us look strange? The barrier's consciousness shook its head. No matter where we land, there is a 40% chance that we will be mistaken as someone from another place. There is a 30% chance that we will be ignored. There is a 10% chance that we will be treated as an outsider. The other small probabilities can be ignored. The observer's eye has such a function? Yes, it is my inference based on the habits of the various densely populated areas in this world. The error is very small. The cute thing nodded. A moment later, it said, the observer's eye found something similar to an airship 100 miles away. It detected a high-energy reaction and inferred that there is a battle. The energy level is close to that of a beginner god. If you want to get in touch with the life of this world, this is a good chance. A beginner god. What is the energy level of this world? Are there any high-level life forms? Yi Shi frowned. There are a lot of demon-class life forms, and a few demigods and beginner gods. There is a 30% chance that there are god-class life forms, and less than 5% chance that there are heaven-class life forms, the barrier's consciousness said calmly. 30%. Well, ignored. Forget it, let's be careful. Yi Shi shrugged, looked at Xian, and nodded. Then, let's go there and have a look. At the top of the clouds, there were huge energy fireworks in the sky. The rumbling explosion of energy scattered a lot of the surrounding clouds. Above the clouds, there were two airships confronting each other. The thick deck and the flanks had obvious high-energy reactions. At first glance, it was obvious that these airships were not ordinary airships used for flying. The white airship was like a huge turtle, and it had the shape of an island. The other 6 protruding islands were full of blue crystals, surging with strong energy waves. When the energy was fully released, even a god-king would be caught off guard. On the central island, there was a blue energy crystal pillar about 10 meters high. It was engraved with mysterious runes and all kinds of symbols. From time to time, a strong energy light would burst out, tearing the two groups of people fighting in the sky battlefield apart. Many people wearing black clothes would be annihilated by the energy light. The other airship was brown and black. The hollow platform structure was divided into upper, middle, and lower levels. It was unknown whether it was blown up or it was originally like that. It was a bit like an ancient mechanical creation. A pair of wings were inserted on both sides of the platform, and the front of the platform was ahead. Hey, at first glance, it looked like a bird. It turned out that the airships described by the consciousness of the stronghold as airships did not even look like airships. Forget about the bird flying in the sky, the tortoise flying in the sky. If it was not supported by a huge amount of energy, wouldn't it have crashed long ago? A bird and a tortoise. Let's take them as 2 airships for the time being. The 2 airships were about thousands of feet apart and were pasting their energies on each other's faces. Both airships were wrapped in thick energy barriers. Between the 2 airships, there was a group of sesame pea-sized figures fighting desperately. They were locked in a fierce battle. If the bird and the tortoise didn't burst out huge energy beams from time to sweep away the enemies on the battlefield, who knew how long this battle would have lasted? Anyway, when Xian and the others arrived, they saw such a scene. The 2 camps were several thousand meters apart, and there was a group of warriors fighting in the middle. It was a heart-wrenching scene. They saw a person in white having his heart ripped out by a person in black clothes. Then here comes the question. Who should we contact in front of these 2 groups? Yi Shi scratched her head. This battle seemed to be brainless to them. After all, they were outsiders. No matter how they looked at it, it was a mess. They had no idea who was fighting who. Speculation. The black side will be defeated in an hour. If we wait until then to lend a helping hand, it will be quite effective, the consciousness of the stronghold said calmly. Oh, so they're just pretending to come in time. In fact, they want us to watch for a while, right? Yi Shi laughed sinisterly. This is fun. Xian patted her head and looked at the brownish-black airship. She looked at the 3 circular hollow platforms in the center of the airship and couldn't help but frown. She saw a mark there. It was an energy mark. It looked like a strange-shaped beetle. Well, she couldn't think of a way to describe it. It looked a little awkward. On the other hand, the mark on the white tortoise was so delicate. "Why don't we go help the white side?" she said weakly. "What's wrong?" She looked at her in confusion. She looked at the two groups and tilted her head in confusion. Zian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "That mark is so ugly," the consciousness of the stronghold said, sending charcoal in the snow and icing on the cake. "I'm just judging the chances of success." She also looked defeated. But when she took a closer look, the mark on the brownish-black airship, it was really ugly. Wasn't it because someone couldn't stand seeing such an ugly mark and wanted to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens? For a moment, Zian, Shi, and Ming all hoped that the white side would be defeated quickly. Then they would have a reason to help the white side. Chapter 1181. Above the sea of clouds, the fierce battle was still going on in the sky, spreading out for thousands of miles. The giant white tortoise and the giant brownish-black bird were facing each other, maintaining a relatively safe distance. Neither of them dared to make the first move. They could only stand outside the battlefield, sweeping away the battlefield with powerful energy torrents from time to time. It was a stalemate, and no one could do anything to the other. It seemed so, but old Wu knew very well that it was only a stalemate on the surface. In fact, the balance of the war had tilted, and it was tilting toward the opponent's side. This made him feel very bad. The energy storm kept blowing away the clouds, and the protective shield of the giant brownish-black bird started to ripple. The energy light flashed across the 1,000-meter-long airship, and the dissipating energy turned into a breeze that blew past his ears, messing up his gray curly hair. His black robe also puffed up in the wind, flapping behind him. Their defensive barrier had been attacked 10 times in just 5 minutes. All of the attacks were from the enemy's warriors. It was impossible for them to cause any damage to their airship. Not even a crack could be seen on the barrier. However, that was not important. These 10 attacks meant that the enemy's offensive was slowly approaching their base camp. Soon, the giant white tortoise would not be so quiet anymore. When the time was right, it would be activated with a roar and turn into a real war machine to end this battle. If they had made some arrangements, perhaps some of them could have escaped. He could not help but let his imagination run wild. He looked at the white airship thousands of miles away. No matter how he looked at it, it was a giant tortoise. This made him curse in his heart. A tortoise, instead of floating on the sea, had to learn to fly in the sky. Was it not afraid of falling to its death? He could only grumble. That was the enemy's base camp. Even if their giant bird fell to its death in the sky, the tortoise would not fall to its death. They were stubbornly resisting. Anyone could see that the front line was losing ground, and more than a third of the soldiers had fallen. Command? Command was useless. What could he do? Rush out and fight the opponent head-on, only to be burned to ashes by a torrent of energy, or be beaten to death? No, he had a more important mission. He might not be able to save the airship, but he had another mission on this trip, and he had to complete that mission even if he had to risk his life. Boom! The huge explosion of energy flattened half the sky. The dazzling brilliance of energy made everyone's vision pale. That was the enemy's energy attack. That was the first tentative attack launched by the energy torrent. If there was even the slightest result, what followed would be a storm of attacks. Reduce the energy charge of the purifying flames. Prioritize maintaining the stability of the defensive barrier. If it is torn open, it will not survive the next round. The pale white flames left behind countless shadows. Old Wu commanded loudly. The pale white light shone on his face, which was full of thick hair and beard. The wind blew his hair back and forth. He could not help but smile bitterly after he gave the command. Defense? He was just putting on an act for the other party to see, acting as if he could still hold on for a while and stall for time. "Come here." Old Wu looked at a warrior standing beside him and called him to his side. This was his trusted aide, whose combat power was second only to him. If they were to break out of the encirclement later, he would definitely have the highest chance of survival other than himself. "When the spaceship crashes, you take the remains of the sacred implement and leave this place with a space jump." The man hesitated for a moment. "But Holy King, that's your escape route." Old Wu waved his hand vigorously. "It's settled, that's it. Those guys who have smelled the blood are just testing the waters. No one expected to run into each other on the sea. A hasty battle is extremely disadvantageous for us. Defeat is only a matter of time. Moreover, the opponents are my old rivals. We have recognized each other. If I did not appear when the spaceship crashed, and this unexpected encounter happened in this place, there is no guarantee that they will not guess something. After all, our actions over the years have not been a secret. They are also speeding up, we cannot fall behind." Old Wu's trusted aide straightened his back and looked at the Holy King seriously and bowed. "As you command, I will bring the remains of the sacred implement back to the holy god safely." "That's good." Old Wu let out a long sigh. Under the intense light of the flames, he suddenly fell silent for a moment before he slowly said, "Legend has it that the battle domain and the guardian domain are like brothers, and work together to maintain the order of the continent." His mindless words stunned his trusted aide. He hesitated for a moment before telling the truth. That might just be an unreliable legend among the people. Moreover, no matter what the legend is, the war between the two realms in the past 10,000 years is not fake. Old Wu nodded and said, "The war has lasted for 10,000 years. 1,000 years ago, the battle domain and the guardian domain had an earth-shattering battle. On the surface, we had won, but in reality, the guardian domain had retained a lot of strength. On the other hand, we had squandered all of our strength. It was also from that year onwards that the situation of the battle domain took a turn for the worse. Even today, we are still losing time after time." The trusted aide was silent for a moment. Although he wanted to say that the enemy was cunning, those were all laughable words. All was fair in war. No matter how they won, no matter how they repelled them, it was still a victory. In the end, only the territory of the battle domain was constantly shrinking. There was no doubt about this. "Holy King, please forgive my ignorance. I believe that even if we bring the remains of the sacred weapon back, we may not be able to turn the situation around. It is just an inanimate object that has been dead for countless years. But if you were to accidentally die here, it would be a great loss to the entire battle domain." Old Wu turned back to look at his trusted aide, who had a serious expression on his face. He knew that his trusted aide was only speaking his mind. It could not be said that the other party's knowledge was shallow. The number of people in the world who still knew about the so-called sacred weapon could be counted on one hand. He should be glad that this slap had landed on the territory of the battle domain. This was one of the few areas where they were ahead of the guardian domain. Even he himself did not know what the sacred weapon was used for. But since he had already made this choice, there was no turning back. He could only believe in the legend, and believe that the faintly discernible legend could bring them a glimmer of hope. A violent buzzing sound was accompanied by an explosion of energy flames that was as bright as day. A crack finally appeared on the energy barrier of the giant brownish-black bird. Old Wu looked back indifferently at the black crack that continued to expand. His face was expressionless. Just as they were talking, they had been hit by the energy torrent several times. They had held on for long enough. Old Wu patted his trusted aide on the shoulder with both hands. The latter trembled and nodded vigorously. He knew that the decisive moment had arrived. He should obey the order and not dwell on something that he could not see. Old Wu waved his hand and shouted, Inject all your energy into the purifying flame. Remove all your defenses and give it a good blow." As soon as he shouted, the first to move was not the giant bird under them, nor was it the giant white turtle. A colorful and brilliant energy beam, about 100,000 feet in size, rushed across the battlefield with a vigorous movement. It rushed past them and pierced through the distant space in an instant. The surging energy of the 5 elements and some kind of mixed energy released an extremely domineering destructive power. It then swept across the entire battlefield, brushing past the giant brownish-black bird. Boom! The monstrous explosion made Old Wu feel good. Although he had no idea what the sudden huge energy reaction was, he did not need to figure it out. He only needed to know that just now, an energy beam that was thousands of times more powerful than their purifying flame had hit the enemy's base. The colorful energy beam did not hit a single soldier on the battlefield but hit the energy barrier of the giant white turtle head-on. The thick energy barrier did not even last a second before it was torn to pieces by the massive energy. In the midst of the emergency, a burst of energy erupted from the giant turtle, but it was pressed down before it really burst out. It seemed to be some kind of emergency defense. The only effect was to shift the huge energy beam a few meters to the right. Now, 3/4 of the giant turtle's body had been completely melted. The cross-section of the giant turtle that was swallowed by the energy beam was so smooth that it could be used as a mirror. "Oh, we missed," I said, to hit the center. "We can definitely hit it. If we hit the center, won't we skewer the people on the bird?" A few gentle and pleasant female voices rang in his ears, like the sound of nature. Old Wu, who was already in a daze, was stunned. However, he was not the only one on the airship who was in a daze. He did not bother to hide it. His cronies' jaws were almost dislocated. It took Old Wu 10 seconds to come back to his senses. He tilted his head and saw a purple-red crystal floating in front of him. It was the crystal that made the sound. He thought for a moment and asked carefully, "Who are you?" He did not want to use a tone that was too abrupt to ask anything. From the high energy of that energy beam, the other party was not someone he could afford to offend. It was fine if he died, but it would not be good if he brought some enemies to the battle arena. Uncle has finally spoken." The voice on the other side rang out again. It was the voice of a young girl. A moment later, the voice was accompanied by the giggling voice of an even younger girl. "Uncle, we are allies, the long-lost branch family of the battle domain. Well, I know you are muddle-headed, and so are we. We have been living in seclusion for many years and do not know many things. But why don't you retreat first and wait for us to roast that turtle? Retreat quickly. If you don't retreat, you will be injured." A faint and beautiful voice rang out. It was a soft and almost inaudible chant. Although it was pleasant to the ears, it gave him goosebumps. He glanced at the melted giant turtle from the corner of his eyes and roared without hesitation. "Retreat! Everyone, come back! Come back! Retreat to the south as fast as you can. If we are late, we will end up like those idiots on the other side." The soldiers who had already lost their will to fight immediately carried out their saint ruler's orders. They turned around and fled without another word. The people who were guarding the region fled with them as well. None of them looked back to see what the enemy was doing. They had all been knocked senseless by the torrent of energy earlier, so they all thought that the enemy had hired a powerful expert. As long as their brains had not been fried by the flash of light, they would have wisely chosen to flee. Anyway, the escape of both parties went smoothly. The people of the battlefield returned to the big brownish-black bird and turned their heads in confusion. They looked at the giant white turtle that had already collapsed and could not make heads or tails of it. The defenders on the other side were clearly at their wits' end. The airship was gradually collapsing. Many of the energy crystals left on the airship had been detonated by the energy torrent. A series of energy explosions exploded on the giant turtle. However, old Wu and the others did not have the time to look at the situation there. At this moment, the best thing to do was to run with their tails between their legs. Just as they were retreating, they saw an even more exaggerated energy torrent, like an endless torrent of the sea, washing the sky clean, accompanied by the sky gradually brightening and a great sense of fear in their hearts. The multicolored energy beam that was millions of feet long streaked across the sky and once again swept across the entire sky that was used as a battlefield. Neither party knew where the attack came from. It appeared in an instant and met the defenders who were not prepared. The defenders who were still baring their fangs and brandishing their claws a second ago were now reduced to nothing. They were all melted into the energy torrent. It hit the target this time. It's easy to aim without any obstacles. The voice of the little girl rang in their ears again. I think we should leave this place quickly before the people in other places sense the energy reaction just now. Xiaoxi, I told you not to use such a large amount of energy. Hee hee. The little girl's voice laughed and said, Uncle, we are going to sit on your airship for a while. We just helped you take care of the defenders. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Old Wu, the old saint king of the battlefield, did not know what kind of expression he should show. He felt that the little girl had emphasized the word, teach them a lesson, so much so that he wondered if he was hallucinating or hearing things. He felt that there was something wrong somewhere. He felt that if they were not allowed to enter, perhaps they would be the next to disappear. Then he very happily agreed. Holy King, this is risky. Old Wu's trusted aide advised seriously. Although they have annihilated the defenders, we have not figured out their actions and identities. It is very dangerous to let them in rashly. Old Wu tilted his head and glanced at his trusted aide. He sighed deeply and patted his shoulder. If they are hostile, you heard it just now. They almost attacked us together. If we refuse, what will happen? Old Wu waved his hand and said, Moreover, if the battlefield really has such a powerful helper, it is actually not bad. Stranger is just a word of the past. The battlefield can talk to anyone. Don't you remember the old holy god's words? If anyone can defend the territory of the battlefield, then he will be one of the rulers of the battlefield. They were already at the end of their rope. But there was no other way. The battlefield had suffered a great loss in that victory, and they really could not contend against the power of the defenders. Old Wu waved his hand and said, Everyone get ready. There is no need to be vigilant. No matter how vigilant you are, you can't stop them. Why don't we go along with their wishes? It sounds quite friendly, doesn't it? At least no one would send a few girls to infiltrate, right? That was what he thought. He originally thought that their complicated airship would cause them to get lost, so he hurriedly went upstairs to welcome them. But just as he arrived at the door of the upper level from the middle level, he saw guests curiously looking around. As he expected, it was a few girls, and they were the kind of girls who could bring disaster to the world. Going back thousands of years, there were also beautiful girls who could cause chaos in the world. He even knew them. But compared to the former, he always felt that the latter was lacking something. He thought about it carefully and finally understood. The women who caused chaos in this world were all just flower vases, but these girls in front of him. He could not tell who had released that energy blast just now, so he could only count them all in. These few might have the power to make the current battle realm and defense realm tremble. The difference between them was obvious. One side was a flower vase, and the other side was a Valkyrie on the battlefield. Well, it was not his fault that he did not react. But when he saw that the ones who had casually annihilated the enemy were such beautiful girls, he did not know what to think. Ahem, uncle, have you seen enough? Our big sister is already taken. The wine-red-haired girl bounced and waved her hand in front of him, causing him to finally come back to his senses. He scratched his head awkwardly. He had not been staring at the girls, but he was still a little too shocked. He had interacted with countless people for half his life, but he had never encountered a situation like today. It was really new. Ziyan stretched out his hand and patted Yi Shi's head. He cleared his throat and said with a faint smile, "Hello, Saint King of Battle Realm. There are indeed many wonderful things in this world that are beyond words. To be able to meet you when we first appeared is already the greatest miracle." Ming whispered to the stronghold consciousness. "Is this line reliable or not? I think Sister Ziyan is holding her breath." The stronghold consciousness nodded calmly. The information obtained by the observer's eye about this planet has a very low probability of being wrong. Combined with that conclusion, it should work. Old Wu straightened his back slightly and subconsciously reached out his hand. He was stunned for a moment. While he was stunned, Yi Shi knowingly reached out and shook his rough hand. Only then did he relax a little. "Thank you very much for rescuing me and my fleet. The battlefield will remember this favor. My name has been forgotten by time. Now my crew calls me Old Wu. As you know, I'm one of the holy kings of the battlefield." Yi Shi grinned. I know. Our family used to have dealings with the battlefield. We are considered a branch family, but we have been in seclusion for a very, very long time. So long that although you have not heard of us, we do exist. If you don't believe me, you can flip through the history of about 8,888 years ago. You should still be able to find us. There's no need. Even if it's for the sake of your goodwill, we should still have the greatest trust. Old Wu waved his hand, then pondered for a moment before hesitantly saying, "But why did you suddenly end your seclusion? I don't mean anything else. The current situation of the battlefield is very bad. Those who are related to the battlefield have either been morally kidnapped by some people in the battlefield or forcibly expelled. It's a mess. Because we are the only ones left in our family. There are also a few who are far away and can't come back for the time being." Yi Shi helplessly spread her hands and sighed with a painful expression. Old Wu's expression froze. "You mean the battlefield?" Ming crossed his arms and turned his head, looking sad and unable to bear to remember. This simple conversation made Old Wu understand what had happened to them. His expression became very complicated, with a trace of regret and pity. But when he thought of their strength, they did not seem to need his pity. He put away that expression. Although he still had a little doubt, he suppressed it at the bottom of his heart. On the other hand, there was also a trace of joy in his heart. Those who had been harmed by the battlefield were almost all part of the battlefield's strength, or their future strength. At this moment, 50 to 60% of the people in the battlefield had suffered the same fate. Because of the old Saint God's words, the people who joined the battlefield later came from all over the world, and their reasons were very different. Some of them were more or less the same because they had been harmed by the battlefield, but only 30 to 40% of the people who truly belonged to the battlefield. Old Wu thought for a moment, then said in a calmer tone, "It's regrettable news, but the war is still going on. Everyone, are losing a lot of things every day. We don't have much time to hold on to the past that we can't protect. The only thing we can do is to keep moving forward. Either we fight or escape. The condition of our spaceship is still stable. We are now on the way back to the nest. Before we go back, you can rest on the spaceship for a while. When you have recovered, we will talk in detail." Ziyan and the others were politely escorted to a large room. When the door was closed, the girls grinned and gave them a thumbs up. That expression translated to "everything is going according to plan." Life was like a play, and it all depended on acting skills. When they came to an unknown place, no matter what happened, they just had to act. Little Purple Soul could not bear to watch. She could not help but cover her eyes and muttered, "You've learned bad things from Big Brother." Chapter 1182. In the middle cabin of the brownish-black airship, Ming poked her head out of the window and looked at the other parts of the airship. This was a 3-story airship with a height of more than 10 meters. It wasn't as spacious as they had first seen. Actually, it shouldn't be a problem for it to carry several thousand people. Just from the black-clothed warriors they had seen just now, there should be more than 1,000 of them. Ming looked out of the window for a while before retracting her head. She ran her slender hand through her silvery hair that had been messed up by the wind. She walked around the spacious, brownish-black room barefooted. It seemed to be made of wood, and she knocked on the wall from time to time. After 2 minutes, she had walked around the room once. She stood in a corner and observed the room. It looked like a large room in an ordinary hotel. It was a square room without any decorations or decorations. However, considering that this ship was one of the headquarters of the battle arena, it was impossible to spend any effort on decorating it. It was very spacious. There was only a large bed and a sofa in the room. When he first walked in, he almost thought that he had been locked in a box. There was probably nothing to do in this place other than sleep. Xian watched as the little angel walked around the room. Her feet were an inch off the ground, and she looked more like she was floating. He could not help but ask, "Ming, what are you doing?" Ming lowered her wings and winked at Xian. "I'm checking out the room, just in case." After saying this, she sat down on the bed and rested her head on Xian's shoulder. She leisurely said, "There's nothing I can do. Sister Ziyan and Xiao she both don't care. When Big Brother isn't here, I can only do these things." The Stronghold's consciousness looked up from Little Purple Soul's head and said, "There are 32 lifeforms within 100 meters. They are all humans or humanoid. They are similar to the humans in the celestial realm. There is no abnormal energy flow within the area. There is no eavesdropping or anything like that." Xian shrugged and glanced at Ming. She meant, "Look, there's someone with better eyesight here." "Ming." "I forgot." Yi Shi leaned against the window and watched for a while. She then turned back and said, "This ship is very different from the ones in the Pantheon. I wanted to find the location of its energy core, but it seems like I was overthinking it." The will of the barrier scanned the surroundings. After a brief moment it said, "This airship is made up of simple connecting devices. It's not the same as the airships in the realm of the gods. The entire airship is a formation device, a weapon. The power that drives it is not elemental energy. However, elemental energy does exist in this world, but it seems that it's only in the hands of a small number of people. Not all living beings have access to it." "Then how did this big guy fly?" Xian asked curiously. "Using pure energy as the driving force." Yi Shi was stunned for a moment. She jumped down from the window and said, "But I don't feel any energy waves that are strong enough to make this airship fly." The will of the barrier jumped from Little Purple Soul's head to her hand. It pointed outside the window. Xian and the others turned to look in that direction. They saw a huge pair of wings. It was the wings of the giant bird. All the energy is sealed in the wings. The efficiency of the energy is close to 100%. There's no leakage. The seal is perfect. Ordinary means can't detect it. So that's the pair of wings that carried this big guy into the sky? Yi Shi blinked. The craftsmanship of the outside world. Ming sighed. "I've never seen anything like this in the realm of 5 elements." Xian looked at her curiously. She was a little disappointed that she didn't go to the realm of 5 element. Therefore, she was very interested in the world Yi Shi mentioned. "What's that world like?" Ming thought for a moment. Yi Shi spread her hands and said casually, "The flames of war were everywhere. The people united with their gods to fight the little monsters." Xian, it's about the same as what Xiao Shi said. That world, you can just think of it as the appearance of the void mist spawn. Then, the creatures there join forces with the gods of the realm of 5 element. In the end, we got involved. Ziyen nodded his head in a daze. He had roughly understood the situation. "We've entered the territory of the battlefields." The voice of the Stronghold's consciousness attracted the attention of Ziyen and the others. The girls moved closer to the window sill and looked out. All they could see was a vast expanse of white clouds. They were flying a few thousand meters above the ground, above the sea of clouds. It would be strange if they could see land. The territory of the battlefields. Yi-Shi touched her 2 tufts of black hair and looked at the will of the barrier. Is the division of this world very detailed? Generally speaking, the battlefields and the defense fields occupy the largest territories. The territories of these 2 fields are centered on the axis of this planet, dividing it into left and right. There are many other scattered empires and forces that can be ignored. In addition, the territories of these 2 fields are constantly changing. In the past hour, the battlefield's territory has shrunk by 1/10,000th. At the same time, the battlefield's territory has expanded by 1/10,000th. Yi-Shi slapped her forehead. Almost 10 times the territory. I heard from that uncle that the battle region and the defense region were as close as a family back then. Later on, they were evenly matched. How did they end up in such a miserable state? Who knows what happened in the 10,000 years of war? Xian turned around and sat on the bed. She stretched lazily. I feel like I'm involved in something complicated. The will of the barrier continued to report. We're about to pass by a large gathering point. We're thousands of meters up in the sky. There's such a thick sea of clouds between us. It's good that we can see it. Yi-Shi waved her hand casually. As she spoke, she caught sight of something from the corner of her eye. She was stunned. It was a gigantic floating island, a gigantic conical floating island. The platform at the top was perhaps several hundred kilometers in diameter, and at the top was a gigantic town. It was about 200 to 300 meters away from the ship in a straight line. Yi-Shi could vaguely make out the movements of a certain person in the town. In any case, she was stunned. So the gathering point of life it spoke of was floating in the sky? Alright, there were many spaces in the 9 god temples. She should not be surprised. Why did she habitually think that human towns were on the ground? Why? That was because they were used to it. Furthermore, the floating islands in the 9 shrines space were all ridiculously large. They could even be considered as continents. Only the floating islands in front of them could be considered proper floating islands. Sister Xian, look. The floating island is huge. Ming pointed at the huge floating island outside the window and said calmly. I see it. But it's not as big as the 9 god temples' floating island. Xian nodded. The will of the barrier looked back at Yi-Shi. Seeing her stunned expression, it thought for a moment and said calmly, the human gathering points on this planet are mostly floating between 1 to 6,000 meters above the ground. Most of them are floating islands. Most? What about the small number? Yi-Shi's face twitched. She seemed to have guessed something. The will of the barrier pointed at the ground below them. Flying ships. These flying ships are mobile fortresses. Some of the flying ships near the floating islands have bridges directly connected to the floating islands. They seem to be permanently connected to the floating islands. Those flying ships also have high-energy reactions. There are also many signs of human life. Ming turned around. Are they like the mobile islands in the sea? They are mobile settlements carrying thousands of people, but these are flying in the sky. Yes. What about the ground? There are no signs of humans living on the ground? Xian asked. The ground is filled with a large amount of energy that cannot be analyzed. It covers almost 80% of the land. The remaining 20% is not suitable for human habitation due to some reasons. However, many strange life forms and mutant species have been born there. Perhaps they have evolved because they have to get used to the powerful energy. We need a physical body to observe. Yi-Shi responded instinctively. She quickly waved her hand. Wait a minute. This is different from why we are here. Speaking of which, what is our goal? Xian was stunned. They were just passers-by to this world. It was because of Little Purple Soul that they traveled from half of the celestial realm to this place. In the end, what were they looking for? Or what were they looking for? They did not know. They had played the role of a group of people and successfully sneaked in. Now that they were asked why they were here, the three girls were confused. Ming Ming picked up the culprit who had caused this awkward situation and swung her around, saying, "Little Purple Soul, you still haven't told us why you're here." The mischievous girl tilted her head and thought for a while. Then she said blankly, "Why? What are we doing?" Xian and Ming were speechless. The girl was also stunned by their reaction. She grabbed a strand of her hair and lowered her head nervously. "Didn't you say, we're just here to take a look? What are we doing?" She was speechless. So the girl's initial motivation was because she was interested in this turquoise planet. Now that she had achieved her goal, why did they go through so much trouble to sneak in with this group of people? She didn't know, but she was the one who suggested to interact with the locals first. She originally thought that Ziyan and the others came here because they discovered something special about this world and wanted to investigate it. In fact, after entering this world, they did discover many strange things, so she believed in this idea even more. Now she knew that it wasn't the case. It was just that Little Purple Soul wanted to come here to play. What a big mistake. After letting her imagination run wild for a while, she waved her hand and sighed. "Forget it. Let's not pursue this matter. Since we're here, let's just take a look. Let's just pretend that I'm interested in this ancient world." Ming looked down at the girl in his arms who was covering her eyes like an ostrich. He could not help but sigh. "You forced yourself to be interested." She laughed dryly. "Since we're here, we can't run away halfway. I did notice something that might interest you." Xian suddenly spoke up. She looked at the barrier's consciousness and said, "The language of this planet is the common language of all races, right? There are slight differences, but it's very similar to the common language of all races. There's no mistake." The barrier's consciousness nodded. She was stunned. This world has always been using the common language of all races? It hasn't changed after such a long time? She had also been to other worlds in this era. High-ranking gods could travel through the stars and the void. She had seen other worlds and had also integrated into them. She was very sensitive to things like language, which could almost be used to symbolize the changes in time and history. In the world she came into contact with, the common language of all races had almost disappeared. Only a few people still used it, treating it as a sacred ancient language. Not many people knew and studied it. She told the barrier's consciousness. It was silent for a long time before it said, "The information of the outside world has to be traced back to the memories of my original self 3 eras ago." "When Little Star was still Wind Moon Shadow?" Xian asked. The barrier's consciousness nodded. "As early as 3 eras ago, the world I came into contact with also used my own language. The Book of Epochs was hidden in my soul and recorded everything. From this, I can conclude that perhaps in this era, or perhaps even further back, the common language of all races has shown signs of being lost. Only a small number of people can remember it." She nodded. "But to see a world that still uses the common language of all races. Interesting, really interesting. How did you find out?" Their language had been enlightened by the Book of the Epochs. Before this, she did not know the common language of all races. Now that she was using it to converse with Old Wu and the others, she subconsciously did not know that she was speaking this language. Xian laughed dryly and scratched his head. "After the Taiyuan festival many years ago, because the people of the demon world came back and used that language, Sister Jean asked me to learn about it. Although I was enlightened by Little Star's Book of the Ages, the information I knew at that time was still there, so I recognized it." They were silent for a few minutes. After a while, she stood up from the bed and said, "It's decided. Let's go and find Old Wu to understand the situation and the situation of this world." They immediately came to an agreement and walked out of the room. Ming even carried the little girl who was dozing off and hurriedly left the room. You want to understand the situation of this world? Old Wu waved his hand to signal the others to do their jobs. Then, he walked to a round table and politely asked Yi Shi and the others to take a seat. Then, he sat down. It took him 2 seconds to understand their plan. Their families were wiped out, and they had to come out and show their faces. Well, such stories were not rare in this world, especially in times of war. Every change in the battle line would cause countless of such incidents. Since they were going to stand on the front stage, and most likely would directly become the enemy of the Protectorate, it was normal to understand some things. Yes, that was it. It took him 5 seconds to figure it out. Then, he nodded and said, I can roughly guess your plan. Well, to be honest, the girls. Well, I don't mean anything by it. I just think it's not safe for you to wander the world alone, especially. He looked at Xian and Ming's faces. Especially, these 2 girls, well, uncle, you don't have to worry about that. We can protect ourselves. Yi Shi grinned. Her legs dangled in the air as she sat on the chair. We also have our own plans, but we have been living in seclusion for many years. If it wasn't for that, well, let's not talk about it. Anyway, we were unprepared and ended up like this. We had no choice but to. Sigh, we can only take one step at a time. Her words and sighs had earned Old Wu's sympathy. He nodded and said, In fact, we will return to my territory tomorrow. This trip is a more important mission. As long as I return alive, the mission will be completed. Moreover, I will have to meet the sacred deity. You are my saviors. If you don't mind, why don't you come with me? I can also explain what happened here. Meet the sacred deity directly. Yi Shi was stunned. She lowered her head and muttered, I'm not ready yet. Old Wu smiled and waved his hand. Don't be nervous. The sacred deity is a very kind person. As long as you are an enemy of the Protectorate, you will be treated as a friend. We will also lend a helping hand to the families that have been destroyed by the Protectorate. Ahem, that's for tomorrow. As for this world, Old Wu pondered for a moment. He slowly stood up and organized his words. I'm not too sure how long ago your family went into seclusion. It's not good to go too far back in time. There will be a lot of wrong information. Let's start from 1,000 years ago. In an even more ancient era, the Protectorate and the Battle Protectorate were as close as brothers. No one knew what had happened back then that had led to a great split. They only knew that one day, the 2 hegemons suddenly started fighting each other. The 2 forces that stood at the top of the planet started a full-scale war right from the start, dragging the entire world into it. The small forces that were sandwiched between them suffered unspeakably. It was not good to join either side, but if they did not join the battle forces, they would definitely be eliminated. The entire continent spent thousands of years in the flames of war. 1,000 years ago, the top forces of the Battle Protectorate and the Battle Protectorate fought a decisive battle. The Battle Protectorate won by a small margin, but the Battle Protectorate's core forces suffered from a hidden illness. On the other hand, the sacred deity of the Battle Protectorate had died in battle, but a sacred deity who was not inferior to the former had taken his place. Moreover, many of the core forces had been preserved. However, no one recognized the sacred deity of the Battle Protectorate and the core forces that had suddenly appeared. They had never shown themselves and had appeared out of thin air. Logically speaking, the Battle Protectorate should have collapsed at an astonishing speed after losing the decisive battle. However, the reality was that the sacred deity of the Battle Protectorate had counterattacked on the second day and pushed the Battle Protectorate's defensive line back several thousand miles. It was only when the Battle Protectorate's forces had regained their strength that they were stopped. The aftereffects of that decisive battle continued to this day. The old sacred deity of the Battle Protectorate had abdicated, and the new sacred deity was still slightly young and needed time to grow. However, the Battle Protectorate did not have much time to wait. The Battle Protectorate carried out several hasty counterattacks, but they all ended in failure. Afterwards, the Battle Protectorate was pushed back several hundred miles and has always been at a disadvantage, falling into such a state. Because the Battle Protectorate had absorbed too much foreign power, it was no longer pure and its internal forces were in chaos. This was something that could not be helped. If not for this, the Battle Protectorate might have disappeared long ago. Old Wu sighed. Yi, she suddenly said, but now the Battle Protectorate is basically just a figurehead. Although it still has the name of the Battle Protectorate, the people inside are no longer the same people. That's right. Old Wu patted his head in distress. It has long been a figurehead. It still maintains its battle lines, but everyone is fighting for themselves. No one listens to anyone else. The 33 sacred kings all have their own ideas and stories. Everyone wants to destroy the Battle Protectorate, but they are unwilling to listen to anyone else's commands. They don't even pay much attention to the sacred deity's commands. Ming raised his head and his golden Mei-Mao flashed. They don't listen to commands in this situation. Even if the Battle Protectorate wins in the end, I'm afraid there will be another battle, and this battle will completely engulf the entire continent. A civil war. Old Wu smiled bitterly. He had already seen through it, but what could he do? This battle still had to be fought. The battle that was supposed to happen was unavoidable, and he could only take it one step at a time. In fact, if the Battle Protectorate still had enough strength, it would not have developed into such a situation. Xian and Ming looked at each other and could not help but sigh softly. The situation in this world was more complicated than they had imagined and was a little troublesome. Chapter 1183. This world was more complicated than Xian and the others had imagined, but there was one thing that they were not surprised by: war. War was a daily occurrence in the void, and on a large scale, billions of planets would be destroyed in a single day. That was probably something that happened a few eras ago. In this relatively peaceful era, there were not that many wars of that magnitude. The war in this world was basically two giants fighting each other, and halfway through, one side would cheat while the other side would draw in all the available forces in the world. As time went on, the situation they were in now became what they were looking at now. One side was the war realm, where countless factions were entangled in anger and strange emotions, and refused to unite. The other side was the garrison realm, which was still cheating. Ming did not mean to target the garrison realm. She and the others had only done it because it was the best way to integrate into this world. Perhaps it was one of the reasons why she did it. She felt that there was something wrong with the garrison realm, and it was a very big problem. A large group of unheard-of champions had appeared out of thin air, and that did not make sense. How could two equally powerful factions hide their forces when they were fighting each other? If they had the time to hide their forces, they might as well gather their strongest forces and push the other side down. Was there really a need for this kind of twisting and turning? No. That was why she felt that there was something wrong with the forces that appeared after the garrison realm was defeated. As for what the problem was, she had only been in this world for a little more than 2 hours. God knows what the problem was. If we stay in this world for a day, the third wave of the meteor shower should be coming. Ming whispered to the barrier's consciousness. Is there any way to speed it up? The barrier's consciousness simply shook its head. There is no need for that. Some of the laws in this world are still in conflict with the laws in the realm of the god. Moreover, the void brought in by this world is stagnant. Before the clash of the two laws ends, the time here will be faster than the outside world. This is the result of the adjustment of the laws. The original flow of time in this world is slower than in the realm of the gods, but now there will be a period of compensation. How long will it take? The barrier's consciousness pondered for a moment before saying, "Before the next meteor shower comes, you can stay here for 10 days. In other words, the flow of time in this world used to be 10 times slower than in the Pantheon?" Ming asked curiously. "To be precise, it's 20 times. The speed of the collision of the natural order will become faster and faster, and the entire process is constantly accelerating. So there might still be some errors." "Perhaps it's more than 20 times," the Stronghold's consciousness said softly. This world was very strange. The continents and oceans were covered by a layer of boundless energy, making them uninhabitable. Even if one were to descend from the sky to 100 meters above the ground, they would still be threatened by that powerful energy. The ground was an extremely dangerous hell for humans. Even god-emperors would be threatened if they got close to it. This was the conclusion that the consciousness of the barrier came to when it observed the layer of energy. The ground had been abandoned, and everyone lived in the sky. The human settlements in this world were huge floating islands that drifted along with the flow of the sky. They had no fixed residence. While Yi Shi and Ming were talking, the large bird-like brownish-black airship had passed by a few floating islands from a distance of 1,000 meters. They only glanced at it from afar. Old Wu also saw it, but he did not order them to get close, nor did he have any intention of going over to greet them. War zones are not allowed to fight each other. Their only purpose of gathering together is to defend against the war zone. Civil war is not allowed. At least, before the fall of the Shin God, this rule is still in effect. However, fighting in the dark is unavoidable. It's the most unavoidable thing in this world. Old Wu sighed and said faintly. Yi Shi noticed that when they approached the floating islands, Old Wu deliberately made the airship stay away from the floating islands. She had a guess. She grinned and said, "Uncle, did you offend them? Is that why you're deliberately avoiding them?" Old Wu's confidant's cheeks twitched. He laughed awkwardly and said, "A few years ago, when some people formed factions and secretly joined forces, you rejected all of them?" Ziyen looked at him. Thinking about his reaction, he voiced out his guess. Old Wu's expression became even more awkward. It seemed that Ziyen's words had hit the nail on the head. "Uncle, whose side are you on?" Yi Shi grinned again. Old Wu straightened his back. His expression was as serious as it could be. "I fight for the war zone. I don't think about who I'm fighting for." Yi Shi could not help but smack her lips when she heard this answer. "Uncle, if you're too honest, you'll be remembered." Old Wu's heroic expression immediately withered. His face seemed to be covered by dark clouds as he smiled bitterly. In reality, he had already been remembered. Otherwise, he would not have taken a detour. It was because he did not want to see certain people. He was glad that he was not restricted by civil war. If he did not have this restriction, he might have been bombarded by more than a dozen people in a day. Moreover, he would have been blown to smithereens by their power. Then, his territory would have welcomed another group of people to lead it. They would have done something more meaningful or even worse. They talked a lot along the way. Old Wu was also a rather talkative person. He told his saviors everything he knew. After all, the information in this world was not a secret. Furthermore, they could not even define the boundaries of a secret in the battle zone. Along the way, Ziyen and the others also saw other airships from further away. Other airships looked much more pleasing to the eye. That beautiful design, that elegant streamline, that exquisite layout, that roaring energy, actually it was not that much better. It was just a little more pleasing to the eye than this large brownish blackbird, but it was really not that much better. They even saw a brownish-black tortoise flying across the sky. The top of that tortoise shell was marked with a mark. That mark was the source of the deduction of point. It was not pleasing to the eye no matter how one looked at it, but it seemed to be the symbol of the battle domain. Speaking of which, Did the creator of this battle domain really not casually set this symbol because he had too much to drink that night? Wouldn't it be embarrassing to walk out with this thing on your head? You're talking about that black mark. That is indeed the mark of the war zone. You don't know about it? Old Wu looked at Yi Shi and the others in surprise. Yi Shi stuck out her tongue. She had accidentally said what she was thinking. What a bad thing. Now she had to think of a way to smooth things over. What would happen if she said that she was muddle-headed from sleep? Without waiting for her to smooth things over, Old Wu slapped his thigh hard. I got it. I forgot about the time interval. The war zone mark was not like this back then. It was even more glorious and majestic. The origin of this mark is also very mysterious. It is said that the founder of the war zone made a copy of it from something. But ordinary people cannot see that mark. If they see it, they will lose their minds or become confused. In any case, there are all kinds of ominous reactions. So the founder changed the mark a few times. Don't tell me that after so many years it ended up like this. Yi Shi felt a little frightened. Old Wu laughed bitterly. This laugh made them even more certain that the person who changed the mark must have drunk too much that night and casually changed it into this unsightly appearance. Time has changed a lot of things. It can't be helped that it ended up like this. It was already set by the Xing deity of many generations ago. Old Wu sighed. What kind of mentality did he have when he set it down? Ming could not help but criticize. I don't mean to speak ill of the Xing deity. It's just that. I know. It doesn't matter. In any case, this matter has long been a hot topic over tea and meals. It has been popular for hundreds of years and has not died down. Old Wu shook his head helplessly. It is said that the Xing deity drank too much that night and impulsively changed the mark into this appearance. After that, many people looked at the mark while drunk, hoping to see something from it. But other than adding millions of drunkards to the war zone, there was no other achievement. Yi Shi, Xian, and Ming. Damn it, it was really set while drunk? Why didn't he tell his cronies to go back then? Old Wu scratched his thick beard and said, Actually, this matter is strange. The Xing deity's cronies of that generation all praised it endlessly. That's why the mark was set so strangely. And when they woke up the next day, they all kept quiet. Xian and the other two girls. They all thought that it was not good to recall that they had set such a strange mark last night, so they kept quiet. After chatting for a while, Xian and the others got up to leave. Old Wu would also take charge of the airship. They had to be careful to avoid some places along the way. He did not dare to leave the task of sailing the airship to his subordinate. However, the journey was very smooth. A day passed in the blink of an eye. The group arrived at their destination unscathed, leaving Yi Shi a little disappointed. She had thought that something would happen in the territory of the battle arena to gain Old Wu's trust. In the end, they arrived at their destination uneventfully. It seemed that after the incident at Yun Nua planet was over, there were much fewer incidents happening. Yi Shi was a little disappointed. She had thought that something would happen in the territory of the battle arena to gain Old Wu's trust. Old Wu's territory was said to be very close to the sanctuary in the center of the war zone. The people in this area were all real war zone people. Only 20 to 30% of the normal war zone people were left. In terms of geographical location, according to the Stronghold's consciousness, it was 7,000 meters above the ground, close to the north. Since it was close to the north and high up in the sky, this place was relatively cold. Old Wu's territory was still a huge floating island. Looking down from above, they could see a crescent-shaped mountain range covering half of the floating island, separating the front and back of the island. The front of the island was a bustling city, and behind the mountain range was a very strange turquoise lake. Looking at it from the perspective of this floating island, perhaps it was the sea of this island. This floating island was much larger than the other floating islands they had seen along the way, and there was an aura that had settled over time. It should have existed for many years. When they got closer, Xian and the others could finally see the full appearance of this floating island. The huge city lined up on the front of the crescent-shaped mountain range was not a complete whole. It was divided into several parts by the turquoise river flowing down from the mountain, and then scattered into several areas along the mountain range. It was a cluster of scattered small cities clustered around the big city in the middle. The areas on the back of the crescent-shaped mountain range were also covered by the shadow of the mountain range, but they were more scattered than the cities on the front. And perhaps because they were close to the sea, there were many buildings that could not be seen in the cities on the front. They were also very magnificent, but they were relatively scattered and lacked a sense of liveliness and prosperity. The dark brown giant bird that Xian and the others were riding on came to a stop outside a protruding rocky mountain range on the floating island. It was connected to the long wooden bridge that extended out of the floating island. Suddenly, many runes that they could not understand lit up near the long bridge and extended all the way to the giant bird, completely stabilizing it. Assimilation runes. At this moment, the ship is connected to the floating island, the barrier's consciousness whispered. Since we live in the sky, we must have some special technology. We can't just park the ship and watch it fly away with the wind, can we? Old Wu saw the curiosity in their eyes and could not help but grin. There must be better technology in the ancient times, but I'm still more used to it now. It's fine as long as the ship doesn't float in the sky. There's nothing special in the ancient times. This assimilation rune should be a metamorphosis of the community runes from 3,000 years ago. It's a simplified version, the barrier's consciousness said calmly. Xian and the others were calm. With the observer's eye, it would be strange if the barrier's consciousness did not know about the things in this world. Oh, so that's how it is. Old Wu was enlightened. He then looked at the cute little thing on Little Purple Soul's head in confusion and could not help but ask, "What's this little thing?" "I've been meaning to ask." "Oh, but if it's a secret, you don't have to tell me." Yi Shi and the others were about to make up a story when the barrier's consciousness said to Old Wu, "Hello, I'm the last remaining elemental spirit in this world, so please don't look at me and don't touch me. Cherish historical relics and stay away from naughty children. Thank you." Old Wu and Xian were speechless. This guy even knows how to smooth things over. It's getting more and more human. Old Wu obviously knew what an elemental demon spirit was. He was in awe and took a step back in awe. "What? So you're an elemental spirit? But what's an elemental spirit?" Yi Shi blinked, looking confused. It's left behind by your family." "Oh right, it's an antique left behind by your family. It's normal for young people not to know about it." Old Wu patted his forehead as he spoke. He then explained, "An elemental spirit is a kind of puppet that is created with the power of the elements in this world. In ancient times, elemental spirits were mostly used to record precious information. Due to the power of the elements, they were also made into weapons for battle. The only downside was that they were very expensive. Even in ancient times, the realm of war and realm of war, they could only make 3 elemental spirits for battle. They were all destroyed in the war that lasted for 10,000 years. Then came the 10,000 years of war, which led to the loss of the art. No one knows about the ancient technology anymore, and the elemental spirits have retired from the stage of history. So, if I'm not mistaken, your elemental spirit is the last elemental spirit in this world." "Oh, I've talked too much." Old Wu patted his forehead and pointed at the bridge. "As you can see, this wooden bridge is used to fix our spaceship. Those runes are not yet repaired. So, little girl, if you poke them again, they will explode. Then, the spaceship will fly away, and thousands of us will have to float in the air to chase after the spaceship and our dreams." Little Purple Soul jumped up and scratched her head with a smile. She had poked one of the runes on the wooden bridge with her finger. The rune was now bursting with energy, and it was flickering and about to go out. Her strange energy immunity was too overpowered. Holy King! A voice as loud as a bell rang in their ears, startling Xian and the others. They looked at each other and turned around. They saw a skinny old man with white hair and a beard, wearing a black robe with gold trim, walking quickly from the end of the long bridge. He waved his hand at old Wu, and the robe was so long that it dragged on the ground. The robe rustled with his vigorous footsteps, and Xian and the others were worried that the skinny old man would fall to the ground in the next second. What worried them the most was that the old man looked to be about 200 or 300 years old. His face was as thin as a dried twig, and his eye sockets were sunken. Yet, he walked with vigor and his back was straight. His eyes shone with a youthful and clear light, just like an 18-year-old boy. But judging from the way he walked, he did look like an 18-year-old boy. The old man jumped in front of old Wu and was about to kneel down when old Wu stopped him. The old man could not help but smile bitterly. You look like you're more than 400 years old. Why are you still kneeling? Judging by your tone, you must have something urgent. Hurry up and tell me. Old Wu had a kind look on his face as he faced the old man, as if he was looking at his own junior. However, he looked like he was in his 30s. This strange difference made Xian and the others' jaws drop. They felt that something was wrong. Old Wu's confidant saw this and quietly came over. He whispered, "Don't be fooled by the Holy King's youthful appearance. He has lived for more than 1,000 years. He is much older than Elder Xian." After that, Ziyan and the others didn't find it strange at all. After all, they also had an old monster by their side. It wasn't very nice to say this about their partner. However, this was the truth. A guy who had reincarnated and lived for over 70 years. If he was placed in the current god realm, wouldn't his age be enough to scare people to death? The old man, who was called Elder Xian by old Wu's confidant, straightened his back and bowed to old Wu. Then, he said in a serious tone, "The holy god is waiting for you in your palace. I don't know anything else." Old Wu's expression became even more serious. Xian and the others were also very curious. This situation was really interesting. Someone had sent him a pillow when he was sleepy. Just as he wanted to take a look at the so-called holy god, he appeared in front of him. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.